Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are now streaming live to YouTube. Chairman, you have a couple of minutes to go. When you're ready, you're able to start the meeting.
Thank you. Right. Good morning and welcome to East Devon District Council's Virtual Development Management Committee on Monday the 18th of May 2020. I am your chairman, Councillor Mike Howe. All participants here today are taking part remotely, and the committee is being viewed online and recorded. So please bear this in mind throughout the meeting. In the event of a break in the internet connection or power cut, please bear with us while we try to reconnect. If we are not able to reconnect after 15 minutes, the meeting will be adjourned and reconvened at a later date. Please check the committee page on our website for further details. During today's meeting, there will be public participation by those who have pre-registered to speak. The process for today's public meeting will be to invite speakers to committee at the beginning of each planning application and return them back to the lobby at the end of the application. To enable us to do this better, there will be a slight pause at the beginning of each application. Please make sure all microphones are muted when you are not speaking to avoid any background noise levels. Please keep your points short and do not interrupt when someone is speaking. If you wish to comment, please raise your electronic blue hand and wait to be called. All councillors have been sent the agenda for today's meeting. Any members of the public who want to view the agenda can do so by visiting our website at eastdevon.gov.uk. I will now start the committee by doing a roll call of everyone here present. When you hear your name, please confirm by saying present. I am, of course, your chairman, Councillor Mike Howe, and I am present. Councillor Paul Arnott.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Kim Bloxham.
Present.
Councillor Colin Brown.
Present.
Councillor Ollie Davey.
Present.
Councillor Steve Gazzard. Councillor Steve Gazzard.
Present.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor Paul Hayward.
Present.
Councillor Nick Hookway.
Present.
Councillor David Key.
Present.
Councillor Tony McCullum.
Present.
Vice Chairperson, Councillor Kathy McLaughlin.
Present.
Councillor Helen Parr.
Present.
Councillor Jeff Pratt.
Present.
Councillor Jack Rowland.
I've been asked to offer his apologies. Unfortunately, he's ill today, Chair. It's Paul Arnott here.
Thank you. Councillor Eileen Ragg.
Present.
Councillor Tom Wright.
Present.
And we've got Mr. Henry Gordon Lennox, Strategic Lead Governance and Licensing.
Present, Chair.
Chris Rose, Development Manager.
Present, Chair.
And Wendy Harris and Amanda Coombs and Debbie Meakin are DSOs.
Present, Chair. Present.
Present, Chair.
Thank you very much. The running order for today's meeting and the speakers list can be viewed under agenda item 1 on page 4. Minutes of previous meeting, page 5. Has anyone any comments to make? Can you please raise a blue hand if you wish to raise any comments? I see none. In that case, I will sign them off somehow. We'll work that one out. Have any apologies been received apart from the one we've just had?
No, Chair.
Thank you. I can confirm we are correct today, so we are fine. Agenda item 4, declarations of interests. Members, when your name is called out, please advise of any interest, including the relevant application number. Wendy.
Councillor Arnott.
No, none, Chair.
Councillor Bloxham.
None, Chair.
Councillor Brown.
None, Chairman.
Councillor Davey.
None, Chair.
Councillor Gazzard.
None, Chair.
Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Wendy. I have two declarations of interest. The first is that I am clerk to Chardstock Parish Council. I attended meetings when this application was discussed and conveyed said comments to the local planning authority. I also declared I had no input into the debate other than in an advisory role and was not involved in that council's vote. So that's the first person interest, and that's on item 192700 FUL. The second is that the same application, I do know the applicant on what I would call nodding terms as from being in the parish, and that approximately 7 years ago we worked on a project together when I was a self-employed handyman, and I believe the applicant was still a self-employed tree surgeon, but we had no pecuniary link between us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hookway.
None, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Howe.
Only agenda item 9. Obviously, I am ward member for Dart Business Park, 19-1849, and the applicant is known to me.
Thank you. Councillor Key.
None.
Councillor McCullum.
None, Chair.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Yes, I'm ward member for Wimple and Rockpier. That's application number 18/1222 MFL.
Councillor Parr.
Yes, Chairman, emailed item 9, that's application 19/1849 full.
Sorry, can you confirm you received an email?
Yes.
Same email to me, Wendy, and also went to Mr. Rose.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt. Councillor Pratt.
No.
Councillor Ragg.
None, Chairman.
And finally, Councillor Wright.
None, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 5, matters of urgency. There are no matters of urgency to discuss today.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
My apologies, I had my hand up.
Sorry.
I had my hand up for the last. Sorry, it was just an additional one. So of course, my apologies, my fault entirely. I'm of course the ward member for 2700 full as well. I add that to my declaration of interest. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. If you can put your hand down. Agenda item 6, confidential exempt items. There are no confidential exempt items to discuss. Agenda item 7, planning appeal statistics, page 10. Chris, Mr. Rose, could you please take us through this?
Thank you, Chairman. Morning, everybody. So you'll see from the agenda that there are 7 appeals listed there that haven't been determined. you'll see that 6 of them, I'm happy to report, were dismissed and 1 was allowed. The appeal that is allowed is a listed building application that related to one of the dismissed appeals. So we had a joint planning and listed building application. The inspector dismissed the planning application, which was for a building within the grounds of a listed building, a new dwelling, but allowed the associated listed building application because that only related to construction of a new wall. You'll also notice, I'll draw members' attention on the report, you'll see that we have the appeal submitted for Liverton Business Park. So members will recall that this committee dealt with an application there for a gas-powered standby generation facility. That appeal has been submitted. It's going through the process at the moment, and just to advise members that the inspectorate are determining at the moment whether they wish that appeal to be determined by way of an inquiry. So I will keep you updated on that, but just to draw members' attention to that appeal having been submitted and being ongoing. And the other thing, the other point to mention that isn't on the agenda there is in relation to an appeal that an application members may recall at Hill Pond for a hotel, so by Hill Pond Business Park. We dealt with an application there for a hotel, which was recommended for a refusal. It went to appeal and the inspectorate granted that appeal, but East Devon challenged that decision in the High Court, so challenged the inspectorate's decision on the basis of failing to go through the right or the right consideration of policies in the local plan. And I can update you and say that the inspectorate now have well, basically conceded or agreed with our position. So we are now hopeful that the courts will refer that decision back to the planning inspectorate, and they will have to consider it again and take into account the points that we raised when we challenged their decision in the first place. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rose. Committee, any questions on what Mr. Rose has just said? I'm taking... Councillor Ragg, you've raised your hand.
Yes, I did. Is the planning, presumably the planning inspector is not bound by the High Court decision? But what if the planning inspector takes the same view as before? What happens then? Does it go back to the High Court?
So we challenged the decision on the basis that the inspector didn't correctly consider the proposal against local plan policies. So what the inspectorate will have to do now is consider that application again, and this time take into account those policies. Now, it is possible that they could come to the same decision, but they need to address those points that we raised in the High Court, or it might be that they reconsider it and come to a different decision. But it will be with them to decide that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gazard, do you want to come back? Or not? Has that answered your question, Councillor Gazard? Mr. Gordon-Lennox?
Hello.
Sorry, Steve. Hi.
It was just on the Liverton business one to ask whether there was a time restraint on how long it was going to take.
Chairman, we've sent everything to the planning inspector that they requested, so it is with the planning inspector at the moment to take their decision firstly on what form the appeal should take, and then to determine the timescale. But I think we would be expecting to hear in the next couple of weeks what form that appeal takes, so whether it be written reps or a hearing or an inquiry. But they don't have a set timetable to work to, but we're hopeful that'll be in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Gordon-Lennox, do you want to come back?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was only just to add to what Chris said about the Hill Pond case, which is it wasn't just local plan policy, but it was also the application of the NPPF in terms of sequential tests for retail considerations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, thank you both of you, or all contributors. welcome to the speakers, Councillor Alan Cook and Councillor and Mr. Jason Lowes, who have registered to speak on application 18-1222 Major Fall, land south of Lily Cottage, Exeter Road, Wimple. This is item 11 on the agenda, pages 155 to 243. Before I invite you to speak, we will first hear the report from the Development Manager, Mr. Rose. Mr. Rose, would you like to kick us off, please?
Just presenting his
Thank
screen.
you, Chairman. Hopefully you are now. I'm now presenting my screen to you. Obviously, working remotely, the slides might be a little slow as I go through them, but please bear with me. So if I get to the first slide. There we go. So this is an application for a new roadside service area, which is including a petrol station, shop and a drive-through restaurant. The application referred from the 3rd of December 2019 committee to seek further information from the applicant in relation to the visual impact of the buildings, including CGI. So hopefully members will recall that. So just as a refresher, if you can see on the screen there the layouts, just to get your bearings. This is the A30 here coming towards Honiton and Ottery. This is the Daisy Mount junction, and then we've got the road that goes down here past the crematorium and eventually down to Cranbrook. So you can see the extent of the site. Sorry, slides are being slow, as I said. So we have a drive-through restaurant on this part of the site with car parking around, and then we have a petrol station and parking and the petrol station forecourt, and then we have parking and a petrol station related for HGV vehicles. Sorry, the slides have been very slow. So we've got a two-story restaurant building and a single-story petrol station and shop. So in consultation with the council's land, oh, here we go. In consultation with the council's landscape officers requested the CGI's viewpoints of the proposal, one from the entrance and one off the A30 slip road from specific positions that we felt would show the proposal, good CGIs to the members to consider. And although we agreed those with the applicant, their consultants went ahead and carried out the CGIs from slightly different locations. And if I can get the slides to work. Sorry, it seems to have frozen. I'm going to stop presenting for a minute and re-present to see if that gets through the slides. Right, let's try a different way because I assume that isn't working for everybody. Can you see the slides on the screen now?
Yes, we can see this. We can see those, Chris.
Okay. So just to go through the slides, this is one of the views from the existing access or the proposed access to the site, and the applicant has provided us with a number of images. So this is a viewpoint of the proposed access with landscaping to the front of the site. So if you can see my cursor, you can see the petrol station and buildings over there. They've then provided a shot without the landscaping. So without, you can see the sort of showing the hard surfaces there. Again, from the entrance, then you can see they've also then showed us an image of the fallback position. So members may recall from the previous meeting that there's a fallback on the site of a larger petrol station and service area, including a hotel. So they provided this rendered image, again without the landscaping, to show what that fallback position, or what they believe that fallback position would look like. Then they have also provided, so this, is a view from the slip road on the A30 looking back towards the site. So this is a photo of that image. And the applicant has again provided some images from that location. So we have this image. So here you can see the restaurant building. You can't really see the petrol station in that image. Then they have, so that's with the landscaping. They've shown an image of that without the landscaping and just the rendered building. And then they've also shown an image of how they feel that fallback building would look. So in consultation with the council's landscape officers, we requested these CGIs. And as I said, although we agreed the position with the applicant, they weren't taken from those agreed positions. You'll see from the report that we've considered these images, and in particular, we've sought views from the landscape officer, who you'll see from their comments have said that they weren't taken from the positions requested. There's no plan associated alongside those images to show him where it were taken from. And more importantly, there's no baseline or technical data to verify the accuracy of those images. And in particular, there's concern that some of them were done at a wide angle, so not at the view that you would see with the eye. So as such, the accuracy of those images is questioned, and you'll see that the landscape architect has advised that the CGIs are highly misleading and should not be given any weight in determining the application. So for example, these CGIs from the A30, there's concerns that the building itself may appear smaller than it actually will to the eye. You'll notice from this image that the location is taken set down from the slip road adjacent to the hedge on a lower piece of grassland. As I said, there's a concern that it might be a wide angle, so not representative of the view to the eye. So we're not recommending that members give these images full weight and can't verify their accuracy because we haven't been given the data to go alongside that. But just to say, we can't refuse planning permission just because the applicant hasn't carried out CGIs as we may have wanted. We still need to consider the application on its merits and make an assessment of its visual impact. One other thing the applicant has done is got revised elevations of the restaurant building. So they've changed the materials to that. So they've gone for brown cladding and grey walls. Try and get it a more softer appearance, but you'll also note in the report that we're recommending that those materials be conditioned so that we can check them should planning permission be approved. And also just to mention that any signage to the building would need to be subject of an advertisement application, so we'd have control over them. Members may also recall on this scheme that we were quite restricted in terms of the landscaping that we can put around the site because of the proximity to the airport. So Exeter Airport have been heavily involved in the application, and we've come to agreement with them over the extent of the landscaping, but it is quite minimal and certainly not enough to screen the buildings from close range. In terms of that fallback position, this is an image of that. So you've got the entrance road here. You can see there was a petrol station, large car park, and much larger buildings proposed on that site. So That is a fallback position that the applicant has started and they could implement, although you might want to give, that hasn't happened for a number of years, sort of 15 years, 10, 15 years. So whether that scheme is now viable or would happen is open to question. So in effect, members are in the same position as they were when they considered a proposal at the December committee. And for the reasons given in the original report, officers remain of the view that the proposal will have a highly visible impact, but this will only be from close range. So it will be mainly on the slip road to the A30 when you are heading towards the site from Exeter direction. So when you're coming up the A30, you will definitely view the buildings here and you will view them from the access road. But further down the A30 or further towards Ottery and Honiton, you won't be able to view the site. But there will be an impact at close range. But notwithstanding this visual impact, obviously you'll see from the report that members have to consider that fallback position, which is a much larger building on the site. It removes more trees, but was arguably of a better design. So in terms of consideration of the application, it falls to policy TC11 of the local plan, which talks about roadside service facilities. The proposal meets most of the criteria, or all of the criteria to that policy. In particular, it provides the right range of services, it's adequately spaced from other facilities, service stations, it's got good access, there'll be no harm to neighbours, it's got access from both sides, or it can be accessed from both sides of the A30, and there's sufficient road capacity. So consideration of the application comes down to the criteria of policy TC11 on whether the proposal is sited, designed and landscaped to minimise the impact on the character and appearance of the area. And it's our view that although those close range views of the site will be highly visible, it does meet that criteria. Finally, you'll see in the report that there's some comments from Councillor Bailey. There's no objection to the proposal from Highways England. They've confirmed that the proposal complies with the relevant circular that they consider the application against in terms of what's required to form a roadside service area and where they should be located. And they confirm there's no policy grounds to support refusal under that circular. The range of goods, we are proposing a condition to restrict them to the range of goods you would normally find at a petrol station. We don't feel that we could restrict them further. Councillor Bailey has made a point about whether we should restrict them in accordance with policy E15 that says that most of the goods should be local, sourced locally, but it's considered that that policy is aimed at rural shops and garden centres and nurseries, and as such, not relevant to a service area. And there's also mention of the climate change emergency, but whilst the council have declared that emergency, we're still required to consider the application in light of the policies in the local plan, or against the policies in the local plan. And obviously the applicant's making the point that there are highway safety benefits from this proposal because you are providing a service area, which by its nature is to encourage people to take breaks so that they can continue their journey safely. So, in conclusion, officers are of the opinion that the acceptability of the proposal comes down to whether its visual impact is acceptable. There will be a visual impact at close range, mainly from the entrance and from that slip road on the A30 going towards the site. But in light of the previous consent and that fallback position that the applicants got, which would have had a greater visual impact, and given the planting restrictions from Exeter Airport, on balance, officers feel that the visual impact for the proposal is acceptable, and as such, we're recommending approval.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rose. I would like first to call Councillor Alan Cook from the neighbouring West Hill Parish Council. You will have a timed 3 minutes to make your representation, and to help you, you'll be given a 30-second warning before your 3 minutes is up. When you're ready, Councillor Cook, please begin.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. When this scheme was considered by your committee in December 2019, the applicants were asked to submit images showing clearly the impact of these development proposals on the environment, especially from the A30 and the site entrance. The images provided are disrespectful of yourselves and the local residents. They do not show the effect upon views across from the site from the A30 or from the access point. The images have done nothing to allay concerns that the development will have a serious detrimental effect upon the local environment. If this application is not refused at this meeting, then the applicant should be asked again to submit meaningful images that accurately show the impact of these proposals upon the local landscape. And I would concur with Mr. Rose's comments about them and the angles that were shown, that they were inaccurate and they give a false impression. West Hill Parish Council objects to this scheme and hopes the committee will refuse for the following reasons. Due to the fact that the site cannot be effectively landscaped, flight path to the airport, there will be significant detrimental impact on the rural environment and unacceptable light pollution. The inclusion of a drive-through burger bar will attract people from a wide range, not just a facility for the A30. This will create a significant increase in traffic on local roads, urbanizing a beautiful rural area. The B3180 is already dangerous, and this facility will cause unnecessary detrimental impact on our community. The building design is urban and unsympathetic to its rural location and should be refused on aesthetic grounds. The council, the West Hill Parish Council, hopes that members will refuse this application due to the impact it would have on the rural environment, because it is not possible to provide adequate landscaping, the impact upon the local community, and unnecessary increased local traffic and building design inappropriate to the area. Thank you, sir.
30 seconds.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Alan Cook from the neighbouring Parish Council. I would now, Mr. Jason Lowes, who is the agent for the application. When you're ready, you have your 3 minutes, please. Mr. Jason Lowes?
Chairman, it appears that he hasn't joined the meeting, so can I suggest that you move on to your next speaker?
I certainly can. In that case, I will call joining board member, Councillor Jess Bailey, please.
Hello?
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Jess.
Thank you very much for letting me speak on this application. I could probably speak for about an hour on concerns that I have, but as I only have 3 minutes, I'm going to focus on what for me is absolutely the key issue, and that is the landscape character and appearance. I am really strongly objecting to this application because I don't believe that it does comply with East Devon's own local plan policy on roadside service facilities, TC11. TC11 subsection 4 has 3 specific landscape requirements for new service stations. It states new service stations must be sited, designed and landscaped to minimise impact on the character and appearance of the landscape. First of all, it's not sited to minimise impact. It's on the top of a highly prominent hill. Second, the design is an urban design, totally out of place in this rural setting. Third, and very importantly, it is not and can never be properly landscaped. Because it's so close to Exeter Airport, there are very strict rules about planting and how large trees can be permitted to grow in order to protect against bird strike. It will not soften over time and will always stick out like a sore thumb, both during the daytime and also at night. Because the application does not meet these 3 landscape tests, it does not satisfy policy TC11. And in comparison from the previous application, I believe that this is significantly more detrimental. In terms of landscape impact, please don't take my word for it. Our own officer states the prominence that this development would have is inevitable given its open and exposed location to the north and west. At the committee hearing in December, the committee requested computer-generated images in order to assess the landscape impact. As and Mr. Rose has said, they've been described as very disappointing and highly misleading by our own landscape landscape consultant. The CGIs need to be ignored because they're not reliable. The position therefore remains exactly as it was in December. The applicant has not demonstrated compliance with the 3 landscape requirements in TC11. The proposal is most definitely not sited, designed, or landscaped to minimise impact on the character and appearance of the landscape.
30 seconds remaining.
I really hope that the committee will exercise its judgment and reject this application on the grounds of TC11. As it does not comply with TC11, it will cause significant detrimental harm to our landscape here in East Devon. Having a 2-storey McDonald's drive-through at this site will significantly and harmfully change the character and appearance forever. Thank you.
Your time is up.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bailey. Now we're going to give Mr. Lowes a second chance because he is actually dialed in. Mr. Jason Lowes, can you hear us and can you respond?
I can certainly hear you. Can you hear me?
We can this time.
Okay, lovely, perfect. Good. Thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you again for the opportunity to speak in support of this planning application. My name is Jason Lowes. I'm a partner in the planning department at Rapley's representing the applicant. I attended and spoke in support of this application back in December 2019. Since then, at the request of the members, the applicant has instructed a specialist to produce CGIs to illustrate the proposals in the landscape. These are professional CGI manufacturers. But before turning to those CGIs, it must be recognised that the application site is in the most sustainable location for this type of use, and notwithstanding the current circumstances, the need for these sites is ever increasing. Roadside service areas are not just a place to quickly fill up the car, but also provide a place to safely stop and rest, something Highways England notes in the committee report. The service area also includes EV charging, which as demands change would be increased on the site. Turning to the CGIs, underlining the site's ideal location for the proposed use, members will recall that the site has an existing planning permission for a much larger roadside service area, which is illustrated on the submitted CGIs for comparison. It's accepted that the CGIs for the consented scheme indicate grey blocks, but this is the best that it's possible to provide, given that the scheme was granted in outline. Regarding the CGIs for the proposed scheme, members can take full comfort in the CGIs produced and that these represent what the development will actually look like to those travelling past the site. In comparison to the development that has permission and could be built on the site, the current proposals are considerably smaller, and although they will be visible, they will not be intrusive. Whilst the landscape officer's comments in regards to camera position and formatting are noted, as I say, the CGIs have been professionally prepared and the viewpoints indicate broadly the same views as those requested by officers, and our CGI specialists have reassured us that the images represent a fair representation of both schemes and show the proposed McDonald's and PFS from both sides of the site as requested. In addition to this, we've taken on board the chair's comments at the last meeting about materials, and I can confirm that the palette of colours used at McDonald's will include more rural finishes, walnut, cladding and stone, and avoid vibrant colours. To conclude, as your officers have confirmed, the proposal complies with the most relevant development plan policy, policy TC11. Since submission of the application in summer 2018, the proposals have been further developed and updated since December last year, and the proposal represents a well-designed and sympathetic scheme. I respectfully urge you all to agree with your officer's recommendation again to grant planning permission for this proposal. On behalf of the applicant, I thank you for your time this morning and the opportunity to speak in support of the proposal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lowes. And next, then we'll move to the ward member, Councillor McLaughlin, please.
Thank you, Chair. This application is back with us so that with the computer generated images, they could be scrutinised and we could make an informed decision as possible on the visual impact of the proposed service station at Daisy Mount. In December 2019, following our Development Management Committee meeting, the applicant agreed to provide the committee with CGIs, and the exact viewpoints from where they would be taken was discussed and agreed upon. When the CGIs were eventually received by the East Devon Planning Office, it was immediately obvious that not only had the consultant agent not sent what was asked for, but it actually sent items that were not asked for. East Devon's landscape officer, Mr. Chris Harriades, had said that the images were highly misleading and should not be given any weight in determining this application, and I wholeheartedly agree with him. There is a mention of the finishes and materials that would be used for the restaurant and the drive-through, walnut and grey cladding, but committee, that leaves the brutal reds and stark white of the petrol station sitting in open countryside on the top of a hill. Protocols and systems were in place for the procurement of the requested images, and it would seem that the consultants have blatantly disregarded them. I think that this committee and East Devon planners should be treated with respect and fairness. Therefore, I ask you, should this committee accept these substandard images and agree with the officer's recommendation to approve? I've listened to the speakers before me, and I would like to propose that we object the officer's recommendation and refuse this planning application on the grounds that it would cause significant harm in a prominent position in the open countryside. Thank you.
Councillor McLaughlin, so what policies are you referring to for your refusal?
Yeah, strategy 46, strategy 7, strategy 3, D1, and I concur with Councillor Bayliss on the TC 11. Does not meet landscape tests.
Okay, right. In that case, thank you very much, Councillor McLaughlin. I need immediately to ask, do I have a seconder for that proposal, please? Any councillor wish to second that?
Can we have that verbally, please? I appreciate there are blue hands. But if
I will.
Councillor Ollie Davey.
Happy to second that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davey. And you're happy with her proposals of strategy 46, strategy 7, strategy 3, TC 11 and D1?
That is exactly what I have written down here.
Lovely. Thank you very much. In that case, we have a recommendation to refuse for those reasons. Committee, let's open it up to the full committee and see what you say before we take a vote. Do we have any speakers?
Yes, there's two speakers, Chairman, Councillor Ollie Davey and Councillor Paul Arnott.
Thank you. Councillor Davey, do you wish to say anything else, or are you happy with your?
No, I've written a lot out, so I'm going to whiz through it, I promise. It is contrary to strategy 7, development in the countryside, which states that development will only be allowed in accordance with a specific local plan and where it is not harming the landscape, the amenity and the environment. I'll come back to those. It's also asserted that it meets the criteria of TC 11. I don't think it does. Number 2 in TC 11 says it should be appropriately spaced. It is 7 miles from Honiton and 8 miles from Exeter, both of which have 24-hour facilities. So I don't see that it is needed. I don't normally expect to find services every 7 or 8 miles on a trunk road. It has to be sited, designed and landscaped to minimize the impact. There have been some improvements, but it's still going to be a 2-story building and has been pointed out a brightly lit garage forecourt, probably with brightly lit signs. And there's an inevitable impact on the environment and it's simply not needed. Because of the proximity to the airport, it is limited landscaping and has been stated of an urban design. I find the road safety argument very specious. I think it will actually have the opposite effect because it will create extra traffic at Daisy Mount. Can you imagine HGVs driving off in order to make a pit stop there, driving around Daisy Mount roundabout? It is going to generate extra traffic. And under strategy 3, sustainable development, which it states in our local plan is central to our thinking. there should be prudent natural resource use, and we should be minimizing fossil fuel use, which I absolutely agree with. This is going to generate extra journeys because it is going to encourage local people to make trips there, absolutely, without a doubt. In terms of the design standards, it doesn't respect the key characteristics and special qualities of the area, and the buildings do not relate well to the context. Those are 21 design standards 1 and 2. In terms of jobs, it's been suggested it will contribute to the local economy. It's going to provide some low-paid, low-skilled jobs, which I don't, I accept are needed. But those people will almost certainly have to make car journeys to get there because the bus service there is pretty limited. And the contribution to the local economy ends there. The suppliers will all be external, so extra traffic, bringing those in. They never use local suppliers, these companies, so there won't be any local benefit there. Construction jobs have been suggested. Highly unlikely. These companies use outside contractors, and there will be very few local jobs supplied there. The profits from these companies go straight out of the local economy, and they make no contribution whatsoever to the local economy. So there'll be a very low positive impact and possible harm by taking jobs from elsewhere, from existing facilities, and competing with local businesses. So there's very little benefit. Highways England don't raise an objection, but that's hardly a ringing endorsement. And I don't contend that there won't be an impact on road safety. The extant planning permission, I think that's a very specious argument as well. That permission is 12 years old, and an opening to a field, which is all that's been done, is surely not enough to count as commencement. And I would think on appeal, an inspector would take the same view. It may respect the letter of commencement of a development, but it's hardly the spirit. So I think we should oppose it, and I think Councillor McLaughlin has covered all the strategies that I felt also sustain an objection here, so I'm very happy to second.
Thank you very much. Councillor Arnott, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I won't repeat the points that have been made so eloquently earlier by Councillors McLaughlin and Davey. So I agree with absolutely everything they've said, and I would have been happy to second Councillor McLaughlin's proposal. Just two comments. The first is that really it is indeed irrelevant about what you could have there or what you might have had there. And I don't really fancy being threatened in the way in which that was suggested. You could have an enormous hotel. Well, it's clearly not going to happen now. It hasn't happened for more than a decade. So what we need to do is look at this and call it what it is. It's a drive-through McDonald's in exactly the wrong place that will not do anything to serve the needs of motorists making a genuine journey along that road, a long distance journey, which has been said is covered more than amply in Honiton and on the eastern fringe of Exeter. So I find that argument fallacious. It will absolutely, therefore, and I cannot understand why Highways England haven't picked this up, it will increase the traffic flow locally and actually make that area around the Daisy Mount roundabout more dangerous. As I said in the previous meeting, I enjoy McDonald's as much, perhaps more than the next man, but this is the wrong place for this. And I think that all of the grounds for objection that have been listed by Councillor Davey and indeed the TC11 that was mentioned by Councillor Bailey earlier, they would have my full support. So I shall be voting with the current motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Amanda, do we have any more speakers?
Yes, we do. Councillor Jeff Pratt, Councillor Helen Parr and Councillor Paul Hayward.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt.
Yes, sorry, Chair, the mute switch wasn't working. I am concerned about the retail aspects of this proposal, and I believe that the as far as the retail element is concerned, this will have an unacceptable impact on Ottery St Mary and its independent shops. The shops lie just 2 miles from the Daisy Mount roundabout, and the position regarding the retail in this development is going to have a bearing on the footfall in the town, and also in consequence thereof the loss of trade. So I am concerned on that respect only, as I am the Ottery ward member, and I think that should be noted, and for that reason alone I would be inclined to support an objection to this this application.
Thank you, Councillor Pratt. Councillor Helen Parr.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, other councillors have said that they don't think the extant permission could be implemented or will be implemented, but I'm concerned that actually it could be, and the applicants have got a permission on this site, and the officer assessment is that this later application is preferable because there will be less landscape impact. And in fact, they have tried to, as you asked, Chairman, they've tried to improve the materials. And I'm afraid I cannot support the motion to refuse on those points. I do think this will be preferable to the extant permission, and there will be social and economic benefits. And I don't believe that the visual impact and landscape harm would be serious to the wider landscape. There will be an impact as you drive past it, and you will see in the entrance, and when you're close to it you will see it, but otherwise I do not think there will be the significant landscape harm that other speakers have claimed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Helen Parr. Councillor Paul Hayward, then I've got Mr Rose to come back.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Just to comment on that last point, I suppose that the point I would make is that if someone offered me that someone's just going to steal £10 from my wallet, in doing so, that would actually stop them stealing £20 from my wallet, that's not an argument I accept. I'd rather didn't steal anything from my wallet. So that whole argument, again, I think is quite unnecessary. What we have been advised, of course, by officers is that the permission is on this site, so something will get built. You know, that is the permission that we're up against. So, you know, the effect to trade in Ottery and other things, whilst I completely empathise, the time for that debate was when this original consent was given. However, on the aesthetic point, and again, like Councillor Arnott, I'm very prone to a McDonald's every now and again, but travelling this road and travelling to and from Cranbrook, I believe that the siting of this is not for the benefit of users of a trunk road. This is aimed at the 20,000 anticipated residents of Cranbrook, and that it's just being used at this site because it's convenient. They own it, so they can get it. But aesthetically, the developer, the applicant, could do a whole lot better. As has been said by Councillor Bailey, it's stuck on the ridge of a hill. There are so many aesthetic, more pleasing things that could be done in this design. With a bit of innovation, this could be almost hidden from view without the need for landscaping, but instead it's a utilitarian urban design that I would expect to see on the outskirts of Slough. In fact, I think there is one on the outskirts of Slough that looks pretty similar to this. It just doesn't fit in. So on that basis, we have a policy in our local plan that stops blights on the landscape. And so if the developer wishes to go forward with this without using the crowbar of I'll build something even bigger, even uglier as a lever, well, they can put that lever down, come back and build something that's aesthetically pleasing, that does provide something to the local economy, provides jobs, but does it honestly and openly, and doesn't try and go through the back door and almost crowbar this committee into making a decision. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Rose, you wish to come back?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just a couple of points. So some comments have been raised about highway safety and the distance between this facility and other roadside service facilities. Just to say that given Highways England haven't objected to the application, neither have Devon County, I think it would be very hard to defend those reasons if they were to be included within the decision. So I wouldn't recommend including anything on the distance between service areas or the safety, highway safety matters. With regard to retail, then we have conditioned and restricted the amount of goods that can go in that facility. So I think we've done what we can there to ensure that the wider impact on services and facilities is reduced to an extent that's acceptable. Just with regard to the fallback position, so obviously if we go to appeal on this, the applicant will be making a very strong case that you know, there's a much larger, more prominent building that's already been approved on the site that has a greater impact. So I think the issue here is the amount of weight that members give that fallback position. So it has to be given some weight, but I think what I'm hearing is that you think that that weight should be limited by the nature of the fact that that scheme is very large, probably not viable or unlikely to be viable in the current days, and that as it hasn't happened for 10 to 15 years since it was consented, that the weight that should be given to it as a fallback should be limited. And of course, so I'm happy with that position if that's the view that members have. Obviously, what the applicant will be advising is that there's less impact from this current scheme than there would be from that fallback. And going back to policy TC11, that they'll be arguing that, you know, criteria 4 says that the proposal should minimise its impact. And I assume the applicant will argue that, you know, they have minimised that by having a proposal that's a lot smaller than the previous scheme and can only be viewed from close range. But saying that, I think it says in the report that you know, the buildings could be, particularly the 2-storey restaurant. We've yet to really receive a response from the applicant to say why that needs to be 2 stories and couldn't be 1-storey, for example. And yes, you know, there probably are better or alternative options for them laying a buildings out on the site that might reduce its visual impact further if you give that fallback that minimum weight. So it won't, you know, it won't be an easy appeal to fight because of that fallback position. But if you are going to go down the route of refusing it, then I'd recommend, I agree with the policies that have been put forward, but I'd recommend that that's restricted to the visual impact and sustainability reasons. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rose. A couple of people have said about the services at the east of Exeter on the motorway on the M5. Being as that is right adjacent to my ward, I do need to point out to people that during the peak seasons, Easter, summer and everything else, you can't get near those services. So you have to be very mindful of what people want and how they want to access things as well. That's not to say this application should be approved or not, but putting your belief in it's not necessary because there's a services in Exeter, you know, is not totally the way Highways England in particular will work, because they know the capacity issues on those roundabouts that the services are already on. Anyway, we have a motion to refuse. Mr. Gordon Lennox, would you like to confirm the recommendation, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So it is a proposal to refuse contrary to officer recommendation on the basis of significant harm in the open countryside in terms of landscape impact, on the basis of it being unsustainable, and collectively the policy basis for that is strategy 3, 7, 46 and policies D1 and TC11. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, I should have said, so members will be asked whether you are in favour of that, whether you are against that, or whether you want to abstain. Thank you.
Thank you very much. over to Wendy, I believe it is, who's going to take us through the list.
Thank you, Chairman. So first is Councillor Arnott.
I'm for the motion. Thank you.
Councillor Bloxham.
Against the motion.
Councillor Brown.
Against.
Councillor Davey.
For.
Councillor Gazzard.
For.
Councillor Hayward.
For.
Councillor Hookway.
For.
Councillor Howell.
Regrettably against.
Councillor Key.
Against.
Councillor McCollum.
For.
Councillor McLaughlin.
For.
Councillor Parr.
Against.
Councillor Pratt.
For the motion.
Councillor Ragg.
For.
Councillor Wright.
Against.
Okay, so I'm just going to total up the fours. That's 9 for the fours and 6 for against. So I can confirm application 18/1222/MFUL, land south of Lily Cottage, Wimpole, is
Refused.
Refused.
Refused, sorry.
Don't
Sorry,
worry, Wendy.
refused.
Thank you ever so much. Right, committee. Thank you for that. We're refusing that application and we're now moving on. Thank you, Councillor Cook and Mr. Lowes, for your contribution this morning. You'll be now returned to the waiting room so that you can end your call. Please feel free to view this committee online on the Council's YouTube webpage. The joining details can be found in your confirmation email and on the agenda. I believe we're going to get a short pause screen while we wait for the next speakers to be invited in. Wendy? Not Wendy? Debbie?
I think they're in. They are in, Chairman.
They're in already, are they? Wonderful.
Yeah.
In that case, welcome to speakers Amanda Grabham, I can't even pronounce that, terribly sorry, and Mike Summerhays, who have registered to speak on application 19-2700, full land adjacent Sunnyside Birchall. This is agenda item 12 on the agenda, pages 244 to 263. Before I invite you to speak, we will hear the report from the development manager. Mr. Rose, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is construction of a building for storage in association with the applicant's arboricultural business. It's here because it's contrary to the ward member comments, and you'll note from the report that there's a relevant planning history to this site. There were applications in 1999 and 2014. There were applications there and refusals for dwellings on the site. Both of those were dismissed on appeal. The 2014 application on the basis of this being an unsustainable location for a dwelling, not due to any impact on the AONB within which the site fits. So you can see the site location here. You can see the small settlement that surrounds it. So you can see the red line of the application site. So this part outlined in blue, the rest of the field does not form part of the application. So you can see there the layout of the site, and there's an existing gated access down on this part of the site that would be used. And here you can see the layout that's proposed, so to use the existing access to come up into the site and to access this building. And the building's proposed to be 5.46 meters wide by 14 meters long, 4 meters to the ridge and 3 meters to the eaves. And you've got a floor plan of the building there. So the site, if I just go back a slide, you can see the relationship here to the nearest property. As I said, the site's in the AONB and there's no built-up area boundary around this settlement. In terms of the photos, so this is a view of the lane. The site's off to the right here, so you can see the narrowness of it and the closest properties to on the other side of the road. And then move forward. So the site's here on the left. This is the existing gated access. And then you can see the views. This is the part of the field that isn't to be used, but you can see the buildings on that part of the site already. And then we have the part of the site. So it's the buildings very roughly to replace the greenhouse that you can see in the image there. And if I just move on, you can see the relationship of the greenhouse to the neighbouring property. So the main issues here are the principle of development, the visual impact, the impact on the neighbours, and highway safety. With regard to the principle of development, there's a neighbourhood plan here for Chardstock, and that includes a policy number 01 that says where development for commercial purposes, it should aim to enable local employment rather than commuting and reliance on private vehicles, thus contributing to enhancing sustainability. In addition to that, there's a local plan policy E5, which states in rural and village locations, small scale economic development is supported on greenfield sites, where in scale and form to the surrounding area. So therefore, in terms of the neighbourhood plan policy 01 and local plan policy E5, there is support for local businesses in this area and on greenfield sites. You'll see from the report that the applicant lives in Smallridge, a couple of miles away from the site, and employs 3 people. So it's a local company employing local people. They currently have a building, but it's further away than this site, and they don't have any security of tenure, hence they wanting to develop this site for their business. So therefore, it will be supporting a local business. It will be reducing travel, as the neighbourhood plan and the local plan policy say, although it's recognised that neither of those policies actually define what they mean by local, so how close someone would need to be to a site to become within that definition of being local, but it's considered that 2 miles is considered to be local. So from that point of view, you'll see the report is saying that the proposal is acceptable in principle. In terms of the visual impact, given the levels of the site and the trees that you can see surrounding, it's only really visible from the access lane. The surrounding planting screens the remainder of the site from views. As I said, the proposal is to replace this greenhouse with the building. It's a small scale building in terms of something that will be appropriate and rural in appearance in a rural area, and therefore it's considered to have a suitable visual impact in this rural area and this AONB location. And as I mentioned, it's relevant to note that the 2014 appeal, which proposed a dwelling on this other part of the site, a 2-storey dwelling, much greater visual impact. In that case, the inspector determined that there was no wider landscape harm on the AONB and it had a neutral impact. And that's obviously material. So the visual impact is considered to be acceptable. With regard to the impact on neighbours, this is the closest neighbour to the site. There's approximately 12 metres. There's no windows proposed in the building. You can see a building on the boundary at the top of the site there, and there won't be any loss of light. There could be an issue of noise from comings and goings, but the applicant has said they're expecting 10 journeys a day and that these will be short-lived. So, you know, they might come to the site in the morning to drop or pick something up and then leave, maybe come back once in a day and then drop something off at the end of the day. They've also confirmed that there'll be no powered equipment on the site, no burning, no chipping, and we can condition that the building be used for storage only. So it's considered the neighbour impact will be acceptable subject to those conditions controlling the use and the impact. With regard to highway safety, as I mentioned, there's 10 journeys a week, although that's difficult to predict for sure. However, given the storage nature of the building, the applicant's business, I think the impact and the number of vehicles is likely to be minimal. And we can condition further to prevent any sales or any deliveries to and from the site. Now, there is a public access that runs along the roadway to the front of the site, so a public right-of-way and a bridleway, but members can see there's already an existing access and gateway there, so it's not considered that there'd be any further or any worse impact than is occurring from that existing gated access. And you'll also see from the report that there's not considered to be any concern impact on ecology or trees, and we can condition these and condition any surface water runoff and drainage. So in conclusion, it's considered their support for the proposal by the neighbourhood plan and local plan that both support small scale local businesses in rural areas to support those local businesses and aid jobs and reduce the use of the car. The storage use proposed would be infrequent, and it's a local business, so it should reduce journeys and give the applicant the security of tenure they need on the site. Not considered to be any harm to neighbours, and we can condition to make sure that that is the case. And there's not considered to be any wider AONB or visual impact given the location of the site and the boundary treatments and the design. So on that basis, the application is recommended for approval with conditions. Thank you.
Chairman.
Sorry, did anyone catch that? No? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rose. I would like to call Amanda Grabham, who has registered to speak as an objector. You have a timed 3 minutes to make your representation, and to help you, you'll be given a 30-second warning before your 3 minutes are up. When you're ready, please begin.
Good morning. Before my 3 minutes start, could I just make 2 quick points? Firstly, to say that I'm representing 4 neighbouring properties, not just myself. All 4 properties have strongly objected to this application, and those properties are Sunnyside, Old Thatch, Orchard Cottage and Thimble Cottage. And the second point before my time starts is that there is an inaccuracy in the information that's been submitted for this meeting. It says that there are 9 dwellings plus a farm that access the lane. That's actually incorrect. There are 7 dwellings currently plus a farm that currently access the lane. So I just wanted to clarify that before I start, if that's okay. So Birchill is an unspoilt hamlet and has an undeveloped rural nature as part of the area of outstanding natural beauty. And we believe strongly that the hamlet should be protected from inappropriate proposals. There have been numerous proposals to develop on this site previously, and all have been rejected. There have been numerous adaptations on proposals this time, all of which have not been supported by the local neighbourhood or the local council. The planning site itself, this latest application, appears to split the land into 2 parts, east and west. For clarity, the applicant has not reduced the scale of the building. In fact, they've actually increased the scale of the development. The building is proposed in the east, which is right next to an elderly neighbour, which is Sunnyside. It's also worth highlighting that the proposed conditions only apply to the east of the land. Therefore, all of our concerns also apply to the west, and it appears that this land has only been sectioned off when these conditions were put in place. With regards to the lane and the vehicle access, the access to the land is via an unmade track, and that cannot withstand any additional traffic. There is reference in the application to an additional 10 vehicle movements per week, with the stated 4 additional people regularly accessing the site early in the morning and in the evening. 10 movements is clearly not realistic and has no means of control. Just last week, South West Water emergency team were called out to make good the track because we had a burst mains water pipe, which is entirely down to additional traffic on the lane. Our gardens were flooded and we had to build a makeshift dam to prevent our homes being flooded. The track can't take any additional traffic. The track's also well used as a public footpath, which is a safety concern. With regards to drainage and flooding, there is little regard being given to drainage, yet all of 4 of our homes, plus others, are actually below the land that is being proposed for development. With regards to waste management, there's no consideration for this. This is clearly a relocation of the entire business, and therefore there will be storage and processing of waste. There already has been. We've already had to contend with numerous bonfires in the west, Please note there are 3 thatched homes within a few metres of this proposed development. Our thatched property insurance states that we must not have bonfires in close proximity, and the
30 seconds remaining.
The NFU have instructed us to call the fire service when this happens. We've already had to call the fire brigade once. This is completely a waste of their time. And our concern is this waste management is going to take place in the west to allow them to meet the conditions. There's clearly a noise concern because of the additional traffic and the wood chipping and the chainsaws. And many of the residents work from home due to the tranquility of the area. So in our opinion, this is completely inappropriate for the residential tranquil area.
Chair.
Chairman, you're on mute.
Lord. Thank you very much, Mrs. Grabham. Next is Councillor Wilson from Chardstock Parish Council. Unfortunately, Councillor Wilson won't be here today, so in his absence, this will be now read out by an officer. Debbie, I believe you have that one for us.
Thank you, Chairman, I do. This is a statement from Chardstock Parish Council, and this is in addition to previously made comments submitted regarding the application. The proposed site for this commercial development has been the subject of 2 former planning applications for residential development in 1999 and 2014. Both of these were refused planning permission and both were dismissed at appeal. Most of the criteria given by East Devon District Council for refusal in the decision notices for the previous applications still apply to the current application, as fundamentally the location has remained unchanged. Our main objection to this application is that the proposed development would be located in a small field in an area of sporadic residential development and within the area of outstanding natural beauty. Development of the site would consolidate existing development in the area and detract from the undeveloped and open character of the site, and would fail to conserve or enhance the natural beauty of the surrounding area of outstanding natural beauty. This wording was taken from the 2014 decision notice. The Parish Council feels strongly that this situation remains unchanged. The proposed development would create a commercial building and its associated business within what is open countryside adjacent to sporadic residential dwellings. The building suggested would be totally out of keeping with the character of the area. The unmade road to the site is unsuited to added traffic, and the added impact this would have on the condition of the track, especially in the winter months. There is no special justification for the proposed development, as the applicant's business is tree surgery, not forestry or agriculture. Complaints about noise and fire adjacent to thatched properties have already occurred since the applicant purchased the site. The Parish Council feels strongly that such a commercial venture and the issues associated would be far better sited outside the area of outstanding natural beauty. We hope that EDDC will support us and that the current proposal is refused permission. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Meakin. I would like to call Mike Summerhayes, who is the applicant, please. When you're ready, Mr. Summerhayes, your 3 minutes will begin. Mr. Summerhayes?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, got you.
Right, sorry, I'll start again. Good morning, Chair and members. My name is Mike Summerhayes and I'm the applicant and the owner of the site. I purchased the land about 2 years ago. I have a tree management business and currently employ 3 men. As it stands, I currently rent an area to store my equipment. However, this is only partly covered and there's no security whatsoever. The owner has indicated that they may not be there for much longer, and if that were the case, I'd have nowhere to store my machinery. I'm therefore looking to invest in a modest storage building which can accommodate my equipment on the land that I own, and which is also close to my property, which is about 2 miles to the south of the site. The site was used by the previous owners as a vegetable and fruit garden. I understand prior to that, there were large poultry buildings in the field, and before that, pigsties, as pigs were reared on the site. Until I purchased the land, it had been left to become overgrown, and there were a number of fallen trees, brambles, large collapsed fruit cage, dead wood, and all matter of rubbish. This I had to cut back and clear to bring back the site to a manageable condition, which has much improved the appearance of the site. In fact, a number of residents have actually expressed their support of this to me. The proposed building is of an agricultural appearance, and it has been positioned on the site so that it would be set back from the track and yet also easily accessible from the existing access. There are many farm buildings to the east which are owned and used by Sunnyside to store and maintain an extensive collection of vintage tractors. In February of this year, I planted a hornbeam saplings hedge to form a hedge on this east boundary to help screening to and from Sunnyside. In these past few months, I've cycled up to the site to water these saplings, and on many occasions seen farm machinery using the track, and also heard power tools and petrol-powered engines coming from one or more directions. Whilst my work varies week to week, I anticipate on average I would only need to visit the site approximately 5 times a week to collect and return equipment, and therefore wouldn't cause any nuisance to nearby residents. In fact, there's a working farm at the end of the track anyway.
30 seconds remaining.
So some of the neighbours have voiced their concerns regarding future noise from machinery and smoke, etc., from bonfires on the site. I think these particular concerns have arisen because of past events, but these were solely undertaken in dealing with the debris from the field. Absolutely no wood or debris has ever been brought onto the site from anywhere else.
Time is up.
Either for processing burning. Right, okay. Right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Summerhayes. Finally, we have Councillor Hayward as Ward Member for Yardley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of DMC. So a couple of points I'd just like to raise, and some of these follow on from Mrs. Grabham's representation. So as you'll see from the plan, and if perhaps Mr. Rose could bring up the plan at the top. So the actual plans that were submitted were for the entire site, which, as you can see now, has been subdivided into 2. So that western site with the circle in it, which is a glorious apple tree with a TPO on it, is now excluded from this application. So the site has been reduced in size, but the building, as opposed to the previous application, is 90% bigger. And as Mrs. Grabham quite rightly says, any conditions that apply in this application that are proposed will not preclude any applicant, whether it's Mr. Summerhayes or any future owner, from undertaking them on the west side. So really, this for me is an immediately something quite erroneous, that the conditions are very limiting, because those things can still carry on the other side of the site. There is already some stockade fencing on the other site, which is, quite within the rights of the applicant to install. But the conditions, unless they applied to the entire plot as owned by Mr. Summerhayes, really aren't worth the paper they'll be written on. Yes, Mr. Summerhayes has planted some more hornbeams adjacent to Sunnyside, but of course a great many trees were removed during the clearance of the site. The site was bought, I would argue, as a speculative garden plot in 2018, as Mr. Summerhayes says. And following on from those previous appeal decisions which were dismissed, they do contain specific covenants which prohibit erection of a dwelling, and obviously the wording there is very clear, but a dwelling for 15 years, and the site was bought with no extant planning consent. So I believe that the community there believed it was being sold as a garden, not as a potential site for a large commercial building. I'm also slightly concerned because the plans, could you go to the next slide, Mr. Rose? the previous application, which was withdrawn, made reference to hard standing, and you'll see on this particular plan that the third key down refers to hard standing all the way from the existing gated access. But there's nothing within this application as to the creation of that hard standing. This application is simply for the creation of that building. So I'm intrigued as to how that hard standing is going to be installed, because it's not part of this application to my knowledge. Now, in terms of the use of this, there was an issue in the report about toilet facilities, and the report sort of poo-pooed this, no pun intended, that it won't be necessary because attendance on site will be minimal. But speaking from my own experience as a handyman in the past, and I had a unit on a farm, which is very similar to this, where I stored my materials. I didn't work from there, I simply just used it to store things. Quite often, you know, I was caught short, and there were going to be 4 people on this site. So, you know, that should be thought about. And I'm afraid the reference that that can be done retrospectively doesn't work for me. If you're going to consider this as a commercial site, then plan these things now, because that could be quite unpleasant for all concerned in the neighbourhood. In terms of employment, you know, the reference in this, in the application document itself, the applicant says that he doesn't intend to create any additional jobs. So really this has no employment gain for the parish of Chardstock, nor the wider ward of Yardley, nor East Devon. It's just going to be maintain the status quo. You know, there is no definition of local. So, you know, the applicant currently has to drive vehicles. He operates a business where driving is part and parcel. So removing the need to reduce vehicle movements, again, isn't really relevant. There's always going to be vehicle movements wherever this applicant decides to run his business. And it's a very long-standing business, and I know of it. I see his vehicles going around. And economy is to be supported. But I don't think simply because it's a mile nearer to where he currently works, that is enough justification to allow a building which, and ultimately comes down to, it's going to be a very large commercial building in open countryside in the AONB, which will cause immediate visual impact to Sunnyside. And frankly, this building could have been built anywhere. The applicant could have bought a farmer's field in the middle of nowhere, but still close to All Saints, close to Chardstock, Membury. We're surrounded by fields with no houses around them, where you could build, if you so wish, a commercial building of this type. There are farms who I'm sure would subdivide a bit of their farmyard and allow a building. But this is an ex-garden surrounded by residential houses. And on that basis, I'm afraid, as much as I, you know, promote the rural economy, I do not think this is the place for this building. And I would like to propose that council or this committee does not support this application on the grounds of visual impact and non-compliance with our local plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hayward. Are you making a recommendation?
Yes, please. I'd like to recommend that we do not support this application.
Can I confirm what policies you wish that based on?
I believe that it is contrary to strategy 7, which resists development in the countryside. And I believe it does not provide, well, whilst it accords to policy E5, it isn't supporting additional economic development. That economic development already exists, whether or not this building is built. So it doesn't promote economic development, it just continues it. But I believe in terms of the overall, I mean, I'm just trying to find the local plan, so I might have to defer to Mr. Rose and Mr. Gordon Lennox, who know this, the local plan back to front, that its visual impact on the AONB, on the parish of Chardstock, on the ward of Yardley, creates more harm than benefit could possibly be created by this building.
That'll be strategy 46.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Right, do I have a seconder? Councillor Arnott, you got your hand up to second? Or...
Yes, I'd be pleased to second that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hayward and Councillor Arnott. Right, so in that case, I'll open it up to committee. Any speakers?
Councillor Chairman, I don't seem to be able to get my hand to come up on the screen, but I'd like to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Key. If you go then.
Yes. Yes, I mean, I've heard everything what Councillor Hayward has said, and I totally support everything that he said. That building, I mean, I've got an agriculturalist, a tree surgeon living not very far from me. He's got a shed a third of that size where he keeps all his equipment, but it is within 200 yards of where he actually lives because he agreed to purchase a piece of land from the neighboring farmer where he lives. I totally agree. This is way, the security on this is a very, very big concern because he lives 2 miles away, as he stated. I know exactly where he lives. I know this area very, very well because I was brought up and went to school in the area. And I just, you know, have very big suspicions that if this building was built, then other development could be in the pipeline in future years. But I cannot see, I mean, yeah, although I know he's got 3 people working for him as well, but with the amount of machinery that you would have, the person I know, I mean, he's got a shed which is probably about 25 foot square, and he is able to actually put all the equipment in there, and it is within 200 yards. The security really concerns me on this because it is a long way away. And I totally agree with what Councillor Hayward has had to say, and there's no way that I can support this application as it stands for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Amanda, do we have any more speakers? Hello, Amanda.
Yes, Chairman. Yep. Yes, you do. Councillor Helen Parr and Councillor Eileen Ragg.
Thank you. Councillor Parr.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I would like to support this application. I think we should be supporting rural businesses, and 3 people are employed by this person, and what he's asking for is a storage building. And I'm looking at the slide that Mr. Rose has left up there. And could he please tell us what the large building just to the east of that proposed building is? Yes.
It's an outbuilding to the adjoining residential property.
Yeah. So looking at the photographs that you showed us earlier, it looked like a wooden shed. I would have thought that an agricultural storage building is the sort of thing you see in a field in a rural area. And we know there's a farm down the road. I've heard the comments about the access. There's no objection from highways. The applicant's the person who will be visiting his storage shed and leaving it once a day probably, so that's very few journeys in addition to the existing journeys made by residents who live along this lane, and obviously the farm, presumably with tractors going up and down. He's going to replace an existing greenhouse, which we can see Mr. Rose has kindly showed us. I think that this is a suitable building. It's for storage. It is not for working. He's going to go there, pick up his equipment, go away with it, do jobs on other people's land, go back with his equipment, shut his shed. I haven't got security concerns there. I'm sure he'll be able to lock it up, and it's quite in the same area as other properties. Overall, I think there will be, this is supporting a rural business, this is supporting the employment, and I have no objections to the proposal. I look at the conditions and I can see condition 3 is saying it shall be used for storage only, and there shall be no storage of wastes, and there shall be no processing of waste or timber. And I'm concerned slightly about the surfacing of the entrance track, or no, it says that there will be details of surfacing required by the authority, and I would ask that this is impermeable if possible. In this location, I don't think we want great big loads of concrete going in. And otherwise, I think with the conditions, it's perfectly acceptable as written. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parr. Councillor Wragg?
Thank you, Chairman. I was particularly concerned, Mrs. Graham's comments on the risk of flooding and the near flooding incident that happened there. I'd just like to ask whether it doesn't look as though the local lead flood risk authority was consulted on this, and what the likely impact would be of this development on the risk of flooding. Thank you.
Mr. Rose, would you like to come back?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so on the last point, it's not of a scale of scheme that the DCC flood risk team would look at, but we have conditioned that they would need to take that any surface water runoff and deal with it in an appropriate way, and certainly Devon County wouldn't allow a scheme that would enable any water runoff to go onto the road, and we would protect the immunity of those surrounding properties. Just on that point, to confirm that the hard standing on the plan does form part of the application, which is why we've got the condition on there about ensuring the materials are submitted, and we would also need to deal with the drainage matters. Just a couple of points to make that have cropped up. So there was a previous application on the site that was withdrawn. As Councillor Hayward outlined, it was a larger site, but a smaller building. So this time we've got a smaller site, but a larger building. With regard to the land to the west that doesn't form part of the application, that will in effect remain in its current agricultural use. So they won't be able to carry out any business use on that without applying for planning permission, and it will retain in agriculture, and so they can only do on that part of the site what they can currently do on the whole of the site. With regard to waste management, that's mentioned in the report that there'll only be a frequent visits to the site, so they'll have to time when they do those visits, so that there are no buildings in the facility, and there's no policy requirement for there to be any, and it wouldn't be usual for us to seek those sort of facilities in every agricultural or storage building that we receive. Just picking up on the business benefits, it might not be proposed at the moment that it's going to be providing more employees, but it's certainly seeking to secure the future of the current employees, because it will give the applicant the security of tenure they need by actually owning this building as opposed to renting somewhere else. And I assume that security might enable the applicant to grow the business, hence the local business benefits that we've identified. There was mention of other appropriate sites, but as members will be aware, we need to consider the application in front of us. We can't dismiss it on this proposal on the basis there might be other sites available or more or less appropriate. And I come back to the fact that we have local plan and neighbourhood plan policies that seek to support these local businesses, and the local plan policy in particular seeks to support small-scale economic development in rural areas, and this is small-scale economic development. So that really brings us round to the main impact I'm hearing, or the main thing that we might be able to refuse it on would be the visual impact of the proposal in the AONB. But we have a single-storey building here, and as I mentioned in my presentation, in 2014, we had an application for a much larger two-storey building on the western part of the site, to which the inspector considered the visual impact of that and concluded that it wouldn't have a harmful impact on the wider landscape. And that's a two-storey dwelling that would have had a much greater visual impact. So whilst I understand members' concerns, it's going to be very hard to fight an appeal on the basis that there are clear economic development benefits to the proposal. And when the same site has had a much larger two-storey dwelling dismissed on an appeal, but an inspector didn't find the visual impact harmful. So caution there really about how well we would be able to defend an appeal on the basis of the visual impact. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rose. Amanda, any more speakers?
Yes, you have, Chairman. Councillors Tom Wright and Ollie Davey.
Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I very strongly support Councillor Parr's views. I heard what Councillor Ragg had to say about flooding, but I'm not incorrect in thinking that the flooding was caused by a burst water main, something of which the Environment Agency has no control. I think this provision will make the business more viable. He will not be having to pay rent, which might give him the opportunity to be able to employ more staff. And I think this building to store materials that are of a totally, if you like, agricultural, arboricultural nature in the middle of the country is totally appropriate. So I would second Councillor Parr's motion to approve the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Davey.
Thank you. Yeah, I too support local businesses. I was slightly concerned about condition 3 not applying to the entire site. I hadn't considered that aspect, but as Mr. Rose has pointed out, that would still be therefore agricultural land, and therefore no commercial activity could be carried out on it. I'm slightly concerned that it's been stated there'll be 10 trips a week, but we have no way of controlling that. But I'm minded to take the applicant's view that it would be a limited number of trips, and as been pointed out, it still serves 7 properties and a couple of a farm. So I'm minded to support the application.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davey, Councillor Davey. Any more speakers, Amanda, or not?
Yes, Councillor Gazzard.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gazzard. Councillor Gazzard. Steve?
He's muted. If somebody could unmute him.
Oh, can you hear me? Sorry.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, regarding the comment that Councillor Davey made regarding the amount of journeys, would it be possible to ask the applicant if he could keep a log? Because if there was a problem, at least there would be some evidence to either support or deny any things that was said about the amount of journeys. Thank you.
Mr. Rose or Mr. Gordon-Lennox, either one of you two wish to answer that?
Yeah, it's very hard to take enforcement action on such a condition. All we can do is control the use of the building and what they can carry out there, which by itself will restrict the amount of activities and comings and goings. And all I can say really is you'll see from the report that Devon County have considered the application and the nature of its use and the junction and the road, and are raising no concerns over that amount of travel. And you've heard from the applicant themselves that the nature of the use and what they're seeking is going to limit the number of vehicles themselves. But I don't think it would be reasonable or enforceable to put a condition on that restricts it to a particular number of vehicles or to keep a log.
Thank you. Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you. Just to ask you, Chris, this on condition 3, which ties it into a storage facility only. How long, what period of time does the condition last for? I can't remember.
So through you, Chairman, that would last forever. That condition would bind for as long as they use the building.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. Right, we have a proposal and a to refuse this. Mr. Gordon-Lennox, would you like to confirm the current recommendation?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So it is a motion to refuse, contrary to officer recommendation, on the basis of an unacceptable visual impact in the countryside, which would be contrary to strategy 7, 46 and strategy 46 and policy E5. Thank you. So you'll be asked to vote whether you are in favour of the motion to refuse, whether you're against it, or whether you abstain. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wendy, can you take us through the roll?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Arnott.
In favour of the motion to refuse.
Councillor Bloxham.
Against the motion.
Councillor Brown.
Against.
Councillor Davey.
Against.
Councillor Gazzard.
Against.
Councillor Haywood.
For.
Councillor Hookway.
For.
Councillor Howe.
Against.
Councillor Key.
For.
Councillor McCollum.
Against.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Against.
Councillor Parr.
Against.
Councillor Pratt.
Against.
Councillor Ragg.
Against.
Councillor Wright.
Remind me, against the motion to refuse.
So you're against the motion to refuse, yes?
Yep. Yep.
Thank you. So we have 1, 2, 3. We have only 4 for in support of the refusal. So that has fallen, I'm afraid.
Thank you very much. Then I'll move from the chair to approve as per officer's recommendation. Henry, would you like to just confirm that again, please?
Yes, so you're now voting in favour of the officer recommendation to support. So it'll be, again, the question of whether you are for or against or abstain. Thank you.
And Wendy, again, can you go through the...
Okay. Thank you. So Councillor Arnott.
Sorry, I remain against.
Councillor Bloxham.
For.
Councillor Brown.
For.
Councillor Davey.
For.
Councillor Gazzard.
For.
Councillor Haywood.
Mr. Chair, I'm afraid I'm still coming back to this point. This application does not allow for any hard standing. So what exactly are we voting for? Just the building and no access to get to it? Because that's what the application says. This is provision of a building. There's, unlike the last application, which included hard standing, this allows for no access to get from that gate to that building.
Mr. Rose, Mr. Gordon-Lennox, would you like to confirm?
Clear on what we're voting on?
Yes, Chairman. So the plan that I've just put up on screen, the one that shows the annotation of the hard surfacing, that is on the plan. It's part of the proposal, so it's part of the application in front of us.
But it's not on the application. It's not, as this planning application hasn't been notified on that basis. It's not on the planning application form.
So through you, Mr. Chairman, that we don't put everything, we can't put everything in the description of development that outlines every part of every application. but what is shown on the plans is what we approve, or refuse. So that forms part of this application.
All right.
Ooh.
Councillor Hayward, so would you like to?
I'm against because it makes a mockery of the planning system, I'm afraid. The planning application is not complete, shouldn't be verified. But there we are. I'm against.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hookway.
Against.
Councillor Howe. Oh, yeah.
For.
Councillor Key.
Against.
No, 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 no.
Councillor McCollum.
For.
Councillor McLaughlin.
For.
Councillor Parr.
For.
Councillor Pratt.
For.
Councillor Rowland. Oh, sorry, no, he's apologies, isn't he? Councillor Ragg.
For.
Councillor Wright.
For.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We have 11 in support, so I can confirm application 18/1222/MFUL, land south of Lily Cottage, Wimpole, is approved.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Grabham and Mr. Summerhays, for your contribution this morning.
Sorry, just to be clear, it wasn't the land south of Wimpole, it's the land adjacent Sunnyside Birchall.
Correct. Yeah. Terribly sorry, Henry. Thank you, Mr. Grabham and Mr. Summerhays, for your contribution this morning. You'll be now returned to the waiting room so that you can end your call. Please feel free to view this committee online on the Council's YouTube page. The joining details can be found in your confirmation email and on the agenda. Before we move into the next agenda item, we should bring the speakers in for the next meeting. Are they in?
Mr. Stuart, yes, Mr. Stuart Matthews is in, Chairman.
Lovely. Welcome to Mr. Stuart Matthews, who's registered to speak on application 20-02820, variation Alphington House, Churchland, Alphington. This is agenda item 10 on the agenda pages 145 to 154. Before I invite you to speak, we will first hear the report from the Development Manager. Mr. Rose, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just share my screen on this item. Okay, there we go. So this is a proposal to vary a condition to a 2010 consent that granted a building ancillary to Alphington House for use. So they want to use it as a B&B. So it was a building that was ancillary to the main house that they now want to use as a B&B by way of varying that original condition. So these are those plans to that original building which remain unchanged. This application is before members as the recommendations contrary to the view of the ward member or a ward member. You'll notice from the report there's comments from the neighbour as well as the town council regarding concerns about access. So this is in Alphington, just beyond the church. So if I just go back to the slide, so I'm sorry this isn't very clear, but we've got a road leading up to the site. We've got the main building, and then we've got the annex building to the south of it on that plan. And in terms of the photos, so we have the main house here. This is the annex building that they want to use for the B&B. Here is an elevation of that, or the front elevation of that building, and the building in the setting of the grounds. So this is the main house, and it's to the rear of this, accessed off its own little parking area. And this is the relationship to the adjoining property. So you can see an access through to the building that is there. So it's already on Airbnb, described as a B&B use, as you'll see in the report. And this building was granted in 2010 and as an outbuilding and as an annex, and there's no alterations to that building proposed as part of this application. So all the windows, elevations, layout all remain the same. So the main issue is the principle of the development and whether the change of the building from a use ancillary to the main house to a B&B is acceptable. And you'll see from the report there's a policy in the neighbourhood plan, NP20, that encourages small-scale holiday accommodation, but only where it's in relation to farm diversity, which this proposal isn't. But there is support from local plan policy E16, which allows small-scale holiday accommodation in the countryside. And this proposal meets most of the criteria to this policy in terms of being in scale with the character of the area, because there's no changes to the building. There'll be on-site servicing provided, and there'll be no impact on the amenity of neighbours, because there's no change to window positions. You'll see in the report there's some points made by the neighbour about how they'd want control over the site. We could prevent the use of this access and use through the main access to the house if permission was granted to reduce any impact on the neighbour. The proposal would be for a B&B use and ancillary uses only, so they wouldn't be able to do any sort of business use or anything from the building. The one thing we can't do that the neighbour was requesting was that we have control over the ownership of the land. Planning can't control ownership, but we can control the use, and I think through the controlling that use, we can protect the amenity of the neighbour. But whilst the proposal complies with a number of criteria to policy E16, the proposal also says that there should be an acceptable impact on road safety. And you'll see from the report there's an objection from County Highways due to the substandard access onto the B3177. So that's the road from Alfrington to Ottery, St Mary and Honiton. And this is that junction. So it's the only access that you can get to the property. And I think you can see from the slides that we've got overgrowth and not hardly any visibility in this direction. And then we've got the building right up to the road edge on that side. So visibility at this junction is very restricted and dangerous. And as you can see, it's tried to be addressed by mirrors. But you'll see from the comments from the Devon County that they're concerned that this use will increase, albeit mainly, maybe only slightly, the number of people coming to and from the building. They're concerned about that increased use of this junction, and they're concerned that it'll be an increased use by people that aren't familiar with the area. So tourists that might be coming to the area, unfamiliar with the roads, will have to use this junction to access and, more importantly, leave the site. And highways are unhappy with that relationship because of this substandard access, and they don't support the use of mirrors to try and address that. So whilst the proposal complies with policy 16 in most of its regard, it doesn't in terms of the harm to highway safety. And as Devon County Highways are recommending refusal because of this substandard access, our recommendation is that the application is also refused for those highway safety reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. I would like to call Stuart Matthews, who's the applicant. You will have a timed 3 minutes to make your representation, and to help you, you'll be given a 30-second warning before your 3 minutes is up. When you're ready, please, Mr. Matthews.
Okay, good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. As you see, this application is to vary a condition, an already existing commission in place for Alfington House, to allow limited bed and breakfast usage. The recommendation from East Devon District Council and Highways Agency is it is rejected on the basis of increased traffic flow. However, I wish to challenge this assertion as it's erroneous and has been applied inconsistently. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. The original application was supported by 2 ward members and Ottery Town Council. There's been no objections by the local residents, and even the immediate neighbours are on record to say that the current usage has not caused them any disturbance. Mr. and Mrs. Creek, our immediate neighbours, have raised representation concerning access and future usage, but I feel these could be easily addressed by modification to the existing condition. The original proposal in 2010 was to convert a dilapidated Victorian coach house into ancillary accommodation for the main house. And this proposal specifically included the use of the property by foreign exchange language students. Those students were transported to and from the property by taxis and minibuses 6 days a week. And this scale and type of traffic flow associated with that original proposal was approved by East Devon and the Highways Agency. We started offering B&B accommodation to guests in lieu of foreign students, as my interpretation of the condition was that the usage was in line with that original condition. Apologies if that was erroneous, but I'd also like to point out that the Valuations Office Agency also do not consider the scale of use that we have been adopted thus far constitutes a business. So that was one of the other associated conditions. There's no change to the coach house itself. It remains exactly as it was when it was converted. It lies entirely within the curtilage of our house. It's entirely dependent on the house for power, water, has no kitchen, no laundry facilities, so it can't be used for separate accommodation, and it is legally tied to the main house anyway, so it cannot be sold as a separate dwelling. East Devon District Council have cited a number of policy documents that are supportive of such conversions, and you've heard a few of them today. Strategy 33, NP 20 talks about diversification of farm businesses. We're not a farm, we are a registered small holding, however, so I don't know if that is relevant in this case. All of that guidance is contingent that the development does not lead to
30 seconds remaining.
An increase in traffic flow, especially at the junction that you've seen. So from a road safety perspective, this application does not lead to an increase in traffic flow over and above what has been previously approved. The recommendation to refuse the application on the grounds of increased traffic flow is also inconsistent with what has been granted recently with a neighbour 2 doors down, which is for an annex accommodation, which specifically mentions increased traffic flow.
Your time is up.
On this basis, I request that this application be approved and this rejuvenated rural building be used to best effect.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews. Next, we have Councillor Faithful, Ward Member for Ottery St Mary. Councillor Faithful, when you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to say, for me, the concern was really about the issue with the neighbour. And I think what was requested was access through the alternative drive at the front of the house rather than using the rear access. And it's about the possible increase in noise and social impact because the properties are right alongside each other. So that is what my concern has been about. Other than that, I'm not sure there's anything else that I'm really concerned.
Thank you, Councillor Faithful. In that case, Councillor Pratt, as a Ward Member for Ottery St Mary.
Thank you, Chair. The application, as you've heard, is for a bed and breakfast arrangement in the former coach house, which will amend or vary the original condition relating to the permission, which goes back to April 2010. And you've heard from Mr. Matthews that that application did in fact include the use of the coach house as a dormitory for foreign exchange students. And I think Mr. Matthews has apologized to the planning officer in regard to he believed that because of that original use, he was covered by the fact that he wanted to use the building for bed and breakfast, all ancillary to the main property. There were conditions suggested by Mr. and Mrs. Creek, who are neighbours, which Councillor Peter Faithful has mentioned, but I believe those can be dealt with, and in fact have been dealt with in the officer's report on page 151, which I believe would satisfy Mr. and Mrs. Creek. So if the committee were minded to approve this application, then conditions could be attached to the permission relating to car parking. There would be a condition requiring the occupants of the building to park in front of Alphington House and to access the accommodation from that property. And that would alleviate any problems involving the access via the old school house, which is the house owned by Mr. and Mrs. Creek. There was a second condition which could be placed again in the if the committee are minded to grant planning permission, and the condition would limit the use of the premises for bed and breakfast purposes, again ancillary to the occupation of the main house. And finally, the applicants are not seeking any use for commercial use, but that was a concern of Mr. and Mrs. Creek, and a condition could be inserted that the building would not be used for commercial use. So I think there are no issues with the neighbour. The next point then is the objection by the Highways Department, and I have to concede that there is a visibility issue at the junction of the B3177. The photograph which is shown now on the screen, you can see this is actually Mill Lane, but the road that leads up to the buildings is now Church Lane, but Church Lane leads into Mill Lane, and then Mill Lane comes down to the B3177. The problem with that is that the Highways Authority say due to increased use of the road, then because of the substandard junction, then there would be an objection raised. But the increased use is really negligible. There are at least 25 properties in Church Lane and Mill Lane using that junction. And in addition to those properties, there is a church and a village hall where people will use vehicles to drive up to the church for services and attend the village hall for various events. So the one additional car that may be used for the bed and breakfast is very negligible, and quite honestly, that to say that there's going to be increased traffic is really against the rules, in my view. So my contention would be that the situation relating to the objection by Highways can be ignored, because the other points raised in the application are of no concern, and the application should be approved subject to those conditions I've mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pratt. I'm going to come back to you in a second because I want clarification of those extra conditions, or Mr. Rose to come back with, does he understand those conditions? Vice Chair, Councillor McLaughlin, you wish to make a statement?
Yes, I do. Terribly sorry, committee. I just need to let you know that I actually know the applicant, Mr. and Mrs. Matthews. Anyway, personal interest only, obviously not pecuniary, but I need to put that out there. Thank you.
Right, Mr. Rose, are you understanding of Councillor Pratt's conditions he wants imposed, or?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I think the main condition that he wants imposed is they should use the main access to the house and not the secondary access, which is closer to right next to the neighbour's property. So we can certainly condition that. I think on page 151 of the report, I've gone through those other conditions that I don't think were necessary, well, we certainly can't control ownership, and there would be a condition that would stop the building from being used for any business use or other use. So I think subject to the condition on restricting it to this tourist use and the condition on the access, I think that's what is required and what Councillor Pratt is requesting, so that can be done.
Okay, Councillor Pratt, is that what you're requesting? You're not speaking, Councillor Pratt. You've got your mic muted.
Sorry, I would just like to clarify with Chris Rose. Did you say that there would be a condition that no other commercial use would be allowed?
That's correct. So we would restrict it to the use that's being applied for, to prevent them using it for some other use or some other use that might generate more traffic or might cause more harm to the neighbour.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have a recommendation to approve contrary to officers' advice. Do I have a seconder, please?
I'd be happy to second that, Chair. Paul Arnott here. Yeah.
Yep. So you're seconding that. Okay. Amanda, do we have a list of speakers?
Yes, you do, Chair. You have Councillor Paul Arnott, Councillor Tom Wright,
Councillor Paul Arnott, do you wish to speak on this as well, or?
Okay.
Yes, and it hasn't in any way affected my decision to second this, but I also, like Kathy, realise that I knew the applicant probably 10 years ago when we used to play football together, but I haven't seen him for a very long time. So just thought I'd better declare a personal interest on the basis of having known him previously. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Arnott. Who's next, Amanda?
Tom Wright.
Councillor Wright. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm at a loss to understand this argument about increased traffic. Once that building was allowed to be built and become an annex, it could generate increased traffic for a number of reasons which don't need planning permission. I don't know what the Matthews's family circumstances are, but I know if I had that house and I had that nice annex every weekend and probably many more days during the school holidays, I'll be inundated with kids and cars and grandchildren and all sorts. So talking about increased traffic by occasional use for a bed and breakfast, in my concern, is totally irrelevant, and I support the application because once that building was built, that we have or converted, we have no control over who the Matthews would put in it to live as guests, as friends, or for any reason, a cleaner, a domestic, a groom, whatever. So I think the argument about traffic is totally nebulous, and the quicker we vote on this, the better.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Amanda, who's next?
Councillor Gazzard.
Councillor Gazzard.
Thank you, Chair. No, the point's been made by Councillor Wright. I was going to make that point as well. Thank you.
Amanda.
Councillor Parr.
Helen.
Hello, thank you. I agree with previous speakers. Highways are concerned about the junction. I can see it's a difficult junction, but there are many difficult junctions in rural areas. And I would support with the conditions suggested, in particular, the access should come from Alphington House and not from the old schoolhouse, and the other condition as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Amanda?
Councillor Ollie Davey.
Councillor Davey?
Thank you. I think most people have said it already. I too was somewhat supportive of the highways objection until I looked at the map and realised that, as Councillor Pratt has pointed out, there are 25 properties, a church and a village hall up there. So I suggest if highways are concerned about the safety of that junction, they put a better speed limit on it. The idea that I think it's been suggested that holidaymakers might be less familiar with the road and therefore more prone to accidents, I think is somewhat specious, because I think in fact they are more likely to be more careful than many of the locals. So I'm totally baffled by highways objection here.
Amanda?
Councillor Eileen Ragg.
Councillor Ragg?
Oh, thank you, Chairman. I'm bemused by highways. Presumably they haven't provided any accident statistics, and as there's another access, I think that in the future they should provide accident statistics. Thank you.
And someone, thank you. Mr. Gordon Lennox, I think you wish to come back.
No, I don't think so, Chair.
Didn't it? Oh, I see. Sorry, I was reading the wrong thing. Mr. Rose, you wish to come back.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just to explain Devon County's comments and position on this. So I think they appreciate that the likely increased traffic over and above what could happen from the house and its usual ancillary uses is appreciated. But I think they are of the view that you've got a house there that can have ancillary, so it can have friends, family visiting. But by allowing this consent, or by allowing this, you would have the house, those friends and family visiting, and then potentially on top of that, the tourists who would come every other weekend, every week, or however it might be. So they feel that there is that small, might be small, but there is that increase in traffic. And really their point is, as Councillor Davey outlined, it's the fact that these people will be tourists to the area and they won't know the roads, they won't know the junction, as well as all of those people that live off the road or go to the church. And they're concerned that a blind junction pulling out onto a B road with its level of traffic and speeds is dangerous. And I hear what members saying. I suppose the only other point I would mention is that I think members will be aware how rare it is for Devon County to raise an objection to a plan application nowadays. So I think that in itself goes to show how strongly they feel about the proposal and the safety implications involved. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Wright, have you got a contrary view or anything else?
Yes, just coming back on Mr. Rose's comments. That house, even with the annex, is a finite occupancy. So if it's filled up with relatives, it can't have guests, and if it's got guests in it, it can't have relatives. So I think Mr. Rose's comments were not particularly relevant. And the fact that the county actually made a comment almost makes us fall down. But I think their comments with regard to the whole circumstances surrounding this lane, all the other properties that use it. I don't know how many Tesco's, Ocado or other delivery vehicles go up and down it. I think their comments actually don't make sense. So I still stand by my support for the application.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve. Mr. Gordon Lennox, would you like to?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the motion is to approve contrary to officer recommendation, which would obviously include appropriate conditions, but specifically including conditions relating to the access, and limitation to tourist use only. And obviously that recommendation, if approved, would negate the need for enforcement action, which is also contained in the existing resolution. So it is a motion to approve with appropriate conditions, and you'll be asked whether you are in favour, against, or you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wendy, can you take us through?
Thank you. Councillor Arnott,
In favour of approving.
Councillor Bloxham,
In favour of approving.
Councillor Brown,
In favour.
Councillor Davey,
In favour.
Councillor Gazzard,
In favour.
Councillor Haywood,
In favour.
Councillor Hookway,
In favour.
Councillor Howe,
Against.
Councillor Key,
In favour.
Councillor McCollum,
In favour.
Councillor McLaughlin,
Against.
Councillor Parr,
In favour.
Councillor Pratt,
In favour.
Councillor Ragg,
In favour.
Councillor Wright.
For.
Thank you. So with only 2 votes against approving, I can confirm application 20/0280/VAR Alphington House, Church Road, Alphington is approved.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matthews, for your contribution this morning. You'll be now returned to the waiting room so that you can end your call. Please feel free to view this committee online on the council's YouTube page. The joining details can be found in your confirmation email or agenda. Right, the next application is in my ward, and as such, I will not be your chairman for this. My vice chairperson, Wendy, Councillor McLaughlin, will be taking over, and she will now take this next item.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Before we move on to the next agenda item, we shall first bring the speakers into the meeting.
Yes, I can confirm that Mr. Granger is in the meeting. Mr. Milverton, the agent, has not come into this Zoom meeting as of yet.
Okay, do we carry on without, or do we wait?
Yes, carry on for the time being.
Carry on. Okay, thank you. All right, welcome to speakers. Robert Granger, I believe, is in, did you say? But John Milverton's not. Is that right?
I am in, I think.
That's correct. Yes.
So John's in, right. Thank you very much. These people have registered to speak on application number 19/1849 M4 Dart Business Park, Cliff St George. This is agenda item 9 on the agenda, pages 96 to 144. Before I invite you to, thank you. Before I invite you to speak, we'll first hear the report from the development manager. Over to you, Mr. Rose.
Chairman, Vice Chairman. So I will just share my screen again. There we go. Yeah, so this is an application for the construction of 6 business units at Darts Business Park. It's before members as its departure from the local plan and the neighbourhood plan, which is the Cliff St George made neighbourhood plan. So in terms of the location of the site, it's at Darts Business Park. So just to get your bearings, we've got Darts Farm here, got a road coming up and round. We've got a number of employment units already here, and you can see outlined in red the extent of the site. And if I just move on, you can see the proposed layout. So here are the 6 employment units that are proposed, and we are in the countryside, in the coastal preservation area, and also forming part of the Green Wedge. So in terms of the area and the layout, so this is the extent of the site. You can see edge red, and you can see an area of trees that are proposed to be replaced as part of this development. And it's also pertinent to note that there's a gas main that runs across that wooded area, which I'll mention in a minute. So you can see You can see the layout of the site. So we've got a run of 4 units, a run of 2 units, and you can see how the configuration works. And there's also a new footway links proposed through the site. So as an aerial, you can see Darts Business Park. You can see that there are these 2 areas of woodland in the area. So it's this area here that's proposed to be developed with this corner being taken off and the gas main freed up. So you can see the extent there. And it's also, you'll also note from the report that there's a 24-hour fuel depot that's proposed to be removed as part of the scheme to enable these 6 units to be developed. They're very much designed to appear like the other units on the site at the moment. So they're single-story employment units. There we go. So functional in nature. Sorry, let me get the slides back. As I say, so they're functional in nature, small units to try and meet the demand that there is in the area for these type of units, because the current business park, business centre is full at the moment. So there's no spare units down there. So in terms of planning history to this site, there was an outline application previously submitted on the site for 10 units. So that was an extra 4 over and above the number of units that we have proposed at this application. And that application went to this committee, so went to Development Management on the 3rd of May in last year, so 3rd of May 19. And members determined to refuse that application as it was contrary to the local plan and neighbourhood plan, as it was in the countryside, outside of a built-up area boundary, and there was considered to be a harmful visual impact and loss of trees that outweighed the benefits to the proposal. And this application has been submitted to address those concerns with a smaller scheme. And it should also be noted that at that committee in May 19, there was a debate and members indicated that they might consider more favourably a smaller scheme that had resulted in the removal of less of the trees and had less unit numbers. And that proposal didn't have the support of the local parish council, which this one does. So, these are you can see the fuel area here that's proposed to be removed. And if I just go through the photos, the site is these trees. So it's behind this building here. So you can see some of the trees that are proposed to be removed. They look quite good at the edge, but they're not worthy of any TPO. And once I show you the photo of the trees inside, you'll see that they need some management, which the applicant is willing to take on as part of the application. So again, the site's behind these existing units. And again, it's behind these trees. And this is the sort of state of some of the trees that are in the site at the moment. So in different ownership, but needs some management that the applicant's willing to take on. So in principle, we're in the countryside. Policy E7 of the local plan supports small scale extension to business parks. This isn't considered to be small scale, so therefore it's considered to be contrary to that policy and a departure. You'll also see the report mentions policy CSG 19 of the neighbourhood plan, which also supports business development within existing business parks, but it says within existing business parks, and this is considered to be outside of it, although you will note that the proposal complies with a number of the criteria to that policy in terms of its visual impact and need. And also relevant is policy CSG 6 of the neighbourhood plan that protects trees and woodlands that are identified on a map. And this is one of those trees and woodlands that I've identified to be retained and protected. And the proposal will result in loss of part of this identified area. Without really any suitable replacement trees being able to be provided, the policy says should be provided 3 trees for each tree that's lost. It's considered it would be difficult for the applicant to propose that given the proposal. So it's considered that the policy the proposal doesn't fully accord with the neighbourhood plan and local plan policies, and it's a departure. So then members will be aware that where we have this situation, we need to consider what material considerations there are and if there are any that outweigh the harm. So you'll see in the report that the business park is full, so it will aid the expansion of that business park. It's expected to create between 20 to 25 jobs, and you'll see that there's support from the Economic Development Officer due to the need for these types of smaller units in the district, which is reflected by the fact that there's no vacancies at the site at the moment. So the proposal will support the rural economy. I've mentioned that the fuel depot will be removed, which is a benefit. There's footpath links through the site proposed. So it's considered that there are some clear economic benefits in favour of the proposal. And I think it's relevant to note that whilst the parish council were not supportive of the previous scheme of 10 units, they are now supportive of this proposal. So moving on to the landscape and visual impact. So this is a wider view looking back towards Darts Farm, and the site is in here within these trees. So I think even with the removal of some of the trees, the site's not going to be highly visible, and it's not in the AONB. And also it's within the Green Wedge in the coastal preservation area, but other than the very close range views, the visual impact is going to be fairly limited, and that's reflected in the comments from the landscape officer. So we will result in the loss of some of that woodland, as I've mentioned, but I've also mentioned the benefits to the scheme. So the gas mains going across the site can be opened up and won't be planted over, which is a safety benefit. The area requires management, which the applicant's willing to take on and we can cover by condition. I've mentioned there's minimal wider impact and remove the fuel store. And also there'll be a better woodland edge and planting that the applicant proposed to this development. So there might be a smaller area of trees left, but it will be much better quality and better managed. And they're also proposing to take on a wetland swell and a ditch to deal with flood risk matters, and that will also have some ecological benefits, because at the moment, whilst the site is covered by a number of trees, it has limited ecological value. So you can see there'd be a limited visual impact, but quite a number of benefits from the proposal. In terms of residential amenity, there's quite a distance between the proposal and the nearest properties, and there's the retained trees that stay between that property and the units. And you'll see from the report that there are conditions to deal with matters of noise, light pollution, and hours of use. There's no highway safety concerns. We've addressed the comments, or the applicants addressed the comments of the EA and DCC as the drainage authority through the swell and the storage and the improvements. And there's minimal impact on the Green Wedge and coastal preservation area. So in conclusion, whilst the proposal is contrary to local plan and neighbourhood plan, there are those employment benefits which need, and other benefits that need weighing up against the loss of the trees and the policy position. So there are those benefits to the safety of the gas main, the improved flood management, the management of the remaining trees and area, removal of the fuel store, footpath link being provided, and lack of any other harm. So on balance, given the minimal visual impact and those benefits, particularly the economic benefits, it's considered that the proposal outweighs that policy position and as such is recommended for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. I'd now like to call Mr. Robert Granger, who has registered to speak as an objector. You'll have 3 minutes, Mr. Granger, to make your representation, and to help, we'll give you a 30-second warning before your 3 minutes is up. So when you are ready, please, would you begin?
Thank you for allowing me to speak. This proposal calls into a question of value of all local democracy. It's contrary to the original East Devon plan for a green wedge between the overcongested A376 and the conservation areas of the River Clyst and Exe. It's also contrary to the current local plan and the neighbourhood plan, as we have heard. The woodland that's going to be affected is currently an effective nature reserve with all manner of unmanaged flora and fauna in there. Presumably the management will mean that this is all be nice and tidy, but none of that will be there. This development offers nothing to the residents of Clyst St George. Hardly any local residents work locally. The only local work that's undertaken is basically youngsters working in the pubs or at Darts Farm. It's only going to mean more traffic to an overcongested A376. I presume these units will be mainly storage and distribution types, which again puts more traffic on a road that really cannot cope at the moment. From our local residents' point of view at Odmers Wharf, we're mainly concerned about the flooding matters. The surface water from this development drains into a tidal ditch. At high water spring tide, every fortnight, that ditch is full. There's nowhere for it to go apart from to our properties. We are really concerned about this situation. Although there is some storage on site and the ponds will hold some water, at the end of the day, it has to drain into that ditch. It seems to me that putting this development in Cliff St George is the wrong place for it. It really should be where the people are who need it. And it'd be preferable if it was actually developed where they live. So thank you for that. They are my points.
Thank you very much, Mr. Granger. Next, we have Mr. Milverton, if he's in, the agent for this application rather. When you're ready, Mr. Milverton, your 3 minutes will begin.
Thank you. Thank you. I can hear you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This year, my wife and I will plant our 20,000th tree. If you want any benefits from planting trees, be it carbon capture or biodiversity, you have to manage them. You cannot plant and walk away. The proposal in front of you involves cutting down some trees, but better managing the rest. Of over 15 acres of trees on site, 97% will remain. The statement in the policy that we cannot comply with a neighbourhood plan and plant 3 trees for every one cut down is incorrect. We can do that in 15 acres, but it won't deliver any benefits. You need good management. On page 115 of the agenda, the Economic Development Officer states there was a market failure to deliver business units in the East Devon area and a 36% shortfall in job delivery. Market failure means no units to set a business up in, no units to expand your business into, and no units for new businesses to move into the area. My client has a 3-year waiting list for units, and he has been asked to evict existing tenants so other businesses can take their place, and he has been offered financial inducements to do that. That arises through sheer desperation and lack of units. I would ask the members in the debate to debate what market failure to deliver business units means and what it means to the East Devon economy. In terms of policy E7, E7 allows the small-scale expansion of business parks. People cannot work in telephone kiosks. There are 13 hectares of employment land in the area, and we are asking for a 0.19 hectare extension. The report states 6 units is not small scale, but 6 units are not being built outside the existing unit. It's an expansion of 0.19 hectare. If that's accepted as small scale, we are in compliance with every policy of East Devon local plan. Mr. Chairman, in our opinion, the benefits of the application have been somewhat, and I've communicated that to your officers. If I give one example, good design is a planning issue. We have achieved good design on this site, but it's not mentioned in the report. We are fully in compliance with policy D1. Overall, we agree with the officers that the recommendation to approve is correct, and that the application should be approved, but we don't agree that it's finely balanced. We think the merits of the application point to straight approval. It's a site that's not visible within the landscape. It's on a bus route. It's on a cycle route. It delivers a long list of benefits. If East Devon has a job shortfall and at the same time a shortage of business units, the solution is pretty clear. There is only one objector and the Parish Council support. I ask the committee to approve the application to the benefit of the East Devon economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Milverton. And finally, we have Councillor Howe, who's the ward member for Clyst Valley. Thank you, Councillor Howe.
Thank you. What can I say on this one? This has been a long-winded since last year when this was, before the election was actually thrown out, when it was much, much bigger. It struggles. I fully understand that we have a market failure, and I wish the council would pick up this market failure of delivering this employment space, because we have loads of employment space allocated in our local plan. It's just unfortunately none of it's being delivered, and that is a disaster for what's happening. The rest of it, actually, I agree somewhat with the applicant. It is a good site. It is a well-designed site. It is a well-run site in most parts. There are one or two neighbours that are relatively close that have been affected by various issues. And I hate losing trees, whether they are left totally unmanaged or whether they are managed, because you can manage a tree to death and you don't get any biodiversity by managing it too much, whereas quite clearly our tree officers believe nature takes its way and you get a lot of biodiversity because you get nooks, crannies and everything else in it. This is a plantation though, and that's what I need to point out. This is not a forest in these areas. They were planned as a plantation many years ago and should have been cut down and replanted as a cash crop. That's never happened. I don't know whether that's good or bad, to be honest, but committee, I leave it to you, to your deliberations, and I shall look forward to the discussion as it goes on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Okay, now I'm going to open this up to committee. If Amanda would let me know when she's got some blue hands up.
You've got 3 blue hands up at the moment, Chairman. Councillor Eileen Wragg, then Helen Parr, then Councillor Ollie Davey.
Thank you very much. Okay, first to Councillor Wragg then, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, 4 years ago when the local plan was adopted, and in the lead up to that with the Working Party working on the local plan, I find it quite surprising that this site wasn't identified then. It's a departure from the local plan and also not in accordance with the neighbourhood plan. So I think on those grounds, there's little point in having these plans if we're not going to follow them. So I think that more consideration should have been given in the lead up to the adoption of the local plan. And on those grounds, I can't support this application.
Thank you, Councillor Wragg. Councillor Parr.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Well, I support this application. I think there's an extremely strong comment from the Economic Development Officer. We must have more small units in our area. We must have places for people to work. And looking at the photograph of the site, a large part of this area is brownfield. It's meaning that storage, fuel storage equipment will be removed, and we shall have work units instead. The trees that are being removed, there will be some replanting along the line of the gas pipeline, and they'll be better managed and better species. And the parish council support this application now, and they say that there will be an improvement for views along the footpath to the west of the site, and of course they support the increased provision for work and for local businesses and for jobs. I think this is a very good application. I did support the other one. There were reasons why other people didn't support that, but this is much improved, and I have no hesitation in supporting, and I will propose it as written in the agenda with the conditions. You can see there are many conditions there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parr. Could we have a seconder, please, for
Yes,
that?
Councillor Key will second it.
Thank you, Councillor Key. Okay. That's great. Right, so that's been proposed and seconded. I think we can open it up a bit more to committee before we take a vote on it. Have I any hands, please?
Yes, you've got a few more hands. The next councillor, the next councillor is Ollie Davey, and then there's 4 other speakers after that.
Lovely. So we'll go to Councillor Ollie Davey. Thank you.
Okay, yes, I'll keep it short then, as we've got several. This is a very sensitive area. It's right next to the River Exe. It is ecologically extremely sensitive. I accept that the woodland possibly is not high quality, but it is birch woodland, and therefore quite important to a number of species. I totally accept the economic benefits from this and the need for units. I would just question whether this is the right place for them, and whether getting rid of a load of woodland of whatever quality it's considered to be is perhaps not the best place to do it. So I find myself unable to support this application at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. Can we have the next councillor, please?
Councillor Steve Gazzard, followed by Councillor Key.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gazzard?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I remember the original plan that came in last year, and for me, this is a better worked out plan. I'm sure that with the planting of the new trees, it will be a lot better for the environment with the new trees. And I also think that, bearing in mind that the parish council are behind this scheme, I'm minded to support the application, Chair.
Oh, thank you very much, Councillor Gazzard. Can we now have Councillor Key, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, I mean, I fully supported this last time when it came forward. My main sort of thing is the fact that, I mean, as it was mentioned before, it's close to the river there, and the doing away with the oil and fuel pumps and everything there, I think is going to be a tremendous advantage, because that could be lethal if anything happened there at any time. And so, yes, I fully support this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Key. Next speaker, please.
Councillor Paul Arnott.
Thank you, Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Chair. I first lived in Topsham in 1984 and have been watching the development of the Darts Farm area ever since. And whilst being very sympathetic to the need for provision of more, under an economic argument, more workspaces and more units in the area, nevertheless, this fact or this assertion about economic facilities is really seriously trumped by the fact that this does not fall in line with our local plan or the local neighbourhood plan. And how many times have we sat in these DMC meetings and been warned severely about the kind of precedents that we will accept? I'm really sympathetic to what the applicant wants to do, but I think it would be much better if we, they may want to get on with it, but it may have to come back in a couple of years' time after we have revisited our local plan. So I can't support this at the moment either, with regret. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Councillor Tom Wright.
Thank you, Councillor Wright.
Thank you. I support the application for many reasons. First of all, it is already in what is an industrial area, which seems to me the logical place to put units. And in view of this council's abject failure, despite promises to provide industrial units on land we own, which we could have developed but have failed to do so, I think we should be encouraged and thankful for local entrepreneurs who are bringing forward such facilities in areas. These new units are totally encompassed within the current area. We've had assurances that the tree situation will, at the very worst, not be damaged, but actually will be improved. These new units will be more sustainable, more viable, and more suitable for this century. And the removal, as David Key said, of the old, probably rotting fuel tanks will be a great advantage. So I have no hesitation in supporting the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Next speaker.
The chairman wishes to speak.
Thank you, Councillor
Councillor
Howe. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on a point about the future care of the woodlands. The owner has owned these woods for quite a while. He could have quite routinely cared for these woods in the past. As much as I hope to believe that he will care for these woods in the future, what certainty, and I suppose it's a question for Mr. Rose, that we can impose or we can guarantee that if he gets this planning application, he will do what he says? Because I don't know, it's words otherwise, once again, that someone's saying they'll do something, but will they actually do it? And I'd just like to ask that of Mr. Rose, if I could, please.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Mr. Rose?
Chairman, yeah, so we've given this a lot of consideration, and you'll see from the report that there are conditions there in terms of the planting and the future management, and it's particularly relevant in this case because of the close location of the site to the ex-estuary and its habitats there. So we have, you'll see that one of the recommendations actually also includes to adopt a habitats regulation appropriate assessment, and that appropriate assessment has addressed the impact from the scheme and has also been passed Natural England. So we've got a double duty here: one, to ensure that condition happens because it's needed as one of the benefits of the scheme, and secondly, to ensure that it doesn't have a negative impact on the ex-estuary. So we can and we will ensure that those benefits that have been put forward are provided via that condition.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. Does that answer your question, Councillor Howe?
I think so. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next speaker.
No, that's it.
That's it.
No more
Okay.
speakers.
Thank you very much. Well, we have a motion, a proposal to support this as the officer's recommendation. So I'm now going to hand you over to Henry Gordon-Lennox, please, to take this forward.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so the recommendation is to approve in accordance with the officer recommendation. It comprises two parts. One is to adopt the habitats regulation appropriate assessment, and then secondly, in the back of that, to approve the application with the conditions that are listed. So again, you'll be asked whether you are in favour of that, whether you are against, or whether you abstain. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Arnott.
Against.
Councillor Bloxham.
For.
Councillor Brown.
In favour.
Councillor Davey.
Against.
Councillor Gazzard.
In favour.
Councillor Hayward.
Against.
Councillor Hookway.
In favour.
Councillor Howe.
Abstain.
Councillor Key.
Approve.
Councillor McCollum.
In favour.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Against.
Councillor Parr.
For.
Councillor Pratt.
Against.
Councillor Ragg.
Against.
Councillor Wright.
4.
5, 6, 7, 8 votes in favour. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 votes against and 1 abstain. So I can confirm application 19/1849/MFUL Dart Business Park, Cliff St George is approved.
Thank you, Wendy. I think I can now hand you back to Councillor Mike Howe. Hurrah.
Thank you, Mr. Granger and Mr. Milverton, for your
Chairman.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Granger and
Thank
Mr.
you.
Milverton, for your contribution this morning. You will now be returned to the waiting room so you can end your call. Please feel free to view the committee on the council's YouTube page. The joining details can be found in a confirmation email on the agenda. And thank you very much, my Vice Chair, for chairing that one. Right, final application, thank goodness. Application number 19-0995, Major Full, land south of Mosshays Link Road, Redhays, Exeter. It's item 1 on the agenda pages 26 to 95. We have no speakers. I don't believe we have any board members either that I can see. No. Mr. Rose then.
Thank you, Chairman. So yeah, this application, members will recall, was deferred from the 3rd of March meeting for officers to negotiate better pepper potting of the affordable housing, to provide more amenity space around the affordable flats that were proposed, provide more bat and bird boxes through the development, and to provide a hedgehog highway through the development. Members may recall this is a full application for 33 dwellings, and it forms phase 8 of the wider Redhays / Tive Barn Green development of some 1,500 dwellings that are in the local plan. So it's a part of that development that's in the local plan to come forward. And you'll recall this layout that was proposed as part of the application. So you members will also recall that the principle of development and the number of houses was considered acceptable, along with matters of design and layout and highway safety, or not layout, but highway safety, with 25% affordable housing provided, and the affordable was in the form of 6 flats on this part of the site and 2 houses. In terms of the deferral from the last meeting, the applicant has agreed to the 50% of the dwellings, all incorporating bird and bat boxes, and to the provision of the hedgehog highway through the gardens of the properties. These can be secured by conditions and are covered by conditions 12 and 26 in the updated report. And just to remind members that the site is, as you can see here, and you can see that there's links to open space to this side of the development. There's further links up north. There's an area of public open space here that is part of the development and have some of the suds features under it. And then to the south of the site, there's sports and football pitches. And then to the west of the site is the centre or to the development, so where there will be some services and facilities. So to cover the points for the reason for the deferral, so in terms of the pepper potting and dispersal, there were comments at the last committee about moving these 2 units, which I hope you can see my cursor here, to a different part of the site to better disperse the affordable units across the wider development. In response to this, the applicant hasn't amended the layout. They do not consider that it's necessary. They feel that the affordable housings are well positioned off the main route through the area, so onto the main highway, well integrated into the development and not hidden away. And they've also provided this plan of the wider area of development, so the 1,500 houses. And if you can see that each of the blue blobs on there are the clusters of the affordable housings at the moment. So they're saying it's adequately dispersed throughout the development. And they're also pointing out that the wider legal agreement for the area allows for clusters of up to 20 units, and they're only providing a cluster, or their cluster is of 8. And they're also saying that in terms of the other clusters here, many are in excess of the 8 that are proposed. They've reiterated the comments before about the management benefits to the affordable housing provider of having the 2 houses next to the flats, and pointed out that there's no government maximum on clusters and that 8 in number is not unreasonable. So for those reasons, the applicant hasn't amended the plan because they feel that the pepper potting and the dispersal of those units is acceptable. In terms of the amenity space to the flats, members will recall that the discussion was about the amenity space around this affordable block. We originally negotiated on the application before it went to committee to get better screen space around the unit. And it's ended up with this sort of like 90 square meters, but it's all sort of in a linear form around the block. But again, the applicants pointed to a development up this part of this wider area for what's called the Minerva development. And that has flats as part of this development in a very similar, if not identical layout to that that's proposed as part of the current application. And the applicants pointed out to us that that has received a Building for Life Outstanding Award in terms of its layout and design. So in light of that, they feel that what they are proposing is acceptable. It's also worth pointing out that the layout and the scheme has been before design review panel, both before the application was submitted and during the course of the application, to ensure that the layout and the provision is acceptable. And that design review panel, subject to some changes the second time round, which were secured, are happy with the layout and also make reference to the good connectivity of the site to all of the open spaces that surround the site, and consider that to be a reason why the amenity space to that flat is acceptable. So in conclusion, the burden back boxes as requested by members has been agreed by the applicant and is conditioned, as are the hedgehog highways through all the rear gardens to the properties and linking them all together. The pepper potting the applicant hasn't done, but officers agree with their arguments as to why that isn't required, and we feel it would be difficult to win an appeal just on the basis of that pepper potting, given the legal agreement for the wider area allowing up to 20 clusters and the other developments that have been approved in clusters up to 20. And that the amenity space around the flats is acceptable given the very close relationship and link to all of those other open spaces and facilities. So in light of that, the application's recommended for approval, but one slight change to the recommendation, if I can, is at the time of finalising the report, I was under the impression that the associated legal agreement securing the affordable units had been confirmed. I understand it's been signed, but due to the coronavirus, it hasn't actually been engrossed yet. So the recommendation needs to change to being approved subject to conditions and to the completion of that legal agreement. So subject to that, the application is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. Committee, over to you. Amanda, have we got any speakers?
Yes, you've got 2 speakers. Helen Parr to start with.
Thank you. Councillor Parr.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'd like to propose this as written with the amendment that Mr. Rose has pointed out, that it should be subject to the completion of the legal agreements on the affordable housing. I think it's quite clear that other neighbouring developments have very similar pepper potting, and it would be unreasonable to try and make the applicant do it any different. As to the open space, as it's quite clear on page 29 in the report, there's very nearby green corridor and the country park links to that. There's sports pitches and planned, and there are links through to other open space. I think everything we can't require them to put any more amenity land around the flats, and there would be the question of maintenance of that as well. They're going to put the burden backed bricks in and a hedgehog highway. I think everything else is acceptable, and I would like to propose we approve. Thank you.
Thank you much, Councillor Parr. Do we have a seconder for that, please? Any councillors second?
I'd like
Yeah.
to second that.
Oh.
Sorry, David. Yeah.
No, you carry on, Kathy.
Okay, yeah, I'm happy to second that.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Amanda,
you.
speakers?
Councillor Paul Arnott.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Chair. I'm delighted for the bats and the birds and the hedgehogs, of course, but these are tiny wins, aren't they, really? This is a terrible game of semantics, and it's a legacy issue from whatever deal was done on this entire area. This isn't pepper potting at all, not even remotely. It is, as Mr. Rose has quite rightly said, clustering. So I can't vote for this because the affordable element, which as I understood it, our policy was, and it's in our local plan, to pepper pot affordables where they are, is simply not being met by this scheme at all. And you can see it on the map. They haven't done anything. We talked about those two lower purple dots coming down to the sort of south of the picture, the bottom of the picture. That's pepper potting. Or breaking up the flats just a little bit. That's pepper potting. This is clustering. But as Helen says, you know, that bird seems to have flown. We've buckled under the previous administrations to this. There's not much it looks as if we can do. I'll be voting against just to try and defend this principle. But I'd like to ask Mr. Rose the question, is pepper potting actually in our local plan in relation to affordable housing, or is it not? Is the word clustering in there somewhere instead? Thank you.
Can I come back, Chairman?
Mr. Rose, yeah.
Yeah, so strategy 34 of the local plan that relates to affordable housing has, as its very last sentence, on any development site, affordable housing should be pepper potted or dispersed throughout the scheme. I think the difficulty, the issue with the policy, of course, is it doesn't actually outline a number at which is classed as dispersed or pepper potted. But from experience of dealing with these, it's very unusual. Or in fact, it's going to be difficult to point to many appeal decisions, if I can think of any, where 8 would be considered to be unreasonable. But saying that, I do agree with you that it's disappointing that the applicant hasn't decided to take up that suggestion of committee in this case.
And not to disagree with Councillor Paul Arnott, we have had appeal decisions, if I remember correctly, King Alfred Way, Newton Poppleford, that deemed clustering effectively was okay. And that went against us, as the inspector said it was fine, if I remember correctly, Mr. Rose. Or no comment from Mr. Rose?
Thank you. No. There have been appeal. There have been a couple of appeal decisions where we have one in terms of getting affordable housing more pepper potted or dispersed throughout the scheme, but I don't think any of them have been where we have units of 8 or less. And I think the King Alfred Way one, that was related to 16 units that I think in the end were better dispersed around the site. But I think even from memory there was a group of 8 on that scheme. Hence, it is going by those appeal decisions. I don't think I can point to anywhere we've had 8 units in a corner of a development and we've asked for it to be dispersed and been successful on appeal.
No, very true. So it was not a political decision; it was a try, but appeal decisions of inspectors have made otherwise. Next speaker, please, Amanda.
Councillor Paul Hayward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I remember this one from the last time, and I was one of the voices that said we should try and put pressure on the developer to do this. I'm taken by the comments, that these comparisons, it's always comparisons which work in the developer's favour. If there's ever comparisons that don't, somehow they're just brushed aside. We mustn't consider them. But if they've done it before, then they must do it again, regardless. And things like, that other block, one of Building for Life. I very much doubt if any of the judges on that panel live in a social block of flats, or if they're ever consulted. it really sticks in my craw, this. I mean, looking at this, I'm looking at it on the plan now, you know, and comments such as, you know, the people in that block and those 2 houses have got access to that land immediately to the east of them, surrounded by trees and hedges. In order to get to a piece of amenity land, the children and residents have got to go onto the main road and then back round. To get to the amenity site on the far west, they've got to walk through another estate. It's just constant denigration and belittling of people in social housing. It would be quite easy to move those 2 houses, but the developer doesn't want to. And it simply is because of failures in our local plan and failure to recognise that just because you can't own your own house, you actually still have some rights to a decent way of life and some social, ability and social mobility and enjoyment of your life, rather than just being stuck into a flat and told that's good enough for you. It won an award, be happy with your lot. So on that basis, and I am grateful that they've, you know, given us some bird and bat bricks and a hedgehog highway. Well, given that that just involves cutting a hole in a fence, you know, really we shouldn't be putting out the bunting for these developers. They've given nothing, really. So yeah, I'm afraid, you know, whilst, you know, we can't, if we went against this, we would lose at appeal. That's the fact. We hear that so many times. So our hands are tied yet again, but they've done nothing. And I think on the next major development, this panel and our future strategic planning direction needs to be very strong and say, you develop for the good of the residents of East Devon. East Devon residents shouldn't put up with developments simply because it puts more money in your pocket and you have to maximise your returns. That's policy. So on this, I'm afraid I am going to vote against it. I know it will go through because the same hands will go up because developers must have their way. But on this basis, I'll say no. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Amanda, next.
Councillor Ollie Davey.
Davey.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I am pleased by the inclusion of the bat and bird bricks. I'm not sure that is a very minor thing. I know not everybody welcomes bats and birds nesting in their houses. So I think the developer is to be congratulated to some extent for that. However, that has not been secured by condition, because condition 12 at the moment mentions bird boxes and bat boxes stroke tubes, and doesn't actually state that those will be bat and bird bricks. So I want those secured by condition, and ditto the hedgehog movement provision, that those are secured by condition. Otherwise, I suspect the developer will conveniently forget about those when it comes to it.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. Councillor Parr, you proposed this, didn't you?
Yes, I did, Chairman.
Are you happy with Councillor Davies' suggestion?
Can he tell me which condition he objects to?
I'm not objecting, I'm suggesting it's modified. It's condition 12. It merely means that bird boxes will be substituted with bird bricks and bat boxes and tubes ditto.
Mr. Rose, are you okay with that?
I can't understand that, because it looks to me as if it says no development shall take place until a scheme for the provision of integral bird bricks and integral bat tubes bricks on at least 50% of the dwellings comprised in the development has been submitted, blah, blah, blah. Should that say 100%?
No, my apologies. It's possible I'm looking at the previous application.
Could Mr. Rose
is that
help
right,
us?
Mr. Rose? Yeah.
Yeah, so you, Chairman, yeah, so condition 12 on there provides for integral bird bricks and for the integral bat tubes and bricks on at least 50% of the dwellings, which is what members asked for at the last committee. So it's the condition 12 on page 33, I think it is, of that report.
My apologies. I'm looking at the previous application. I think I was possibly misled by the numbers given for this application.
No worries.
So I'm content with that, Councillor Howe.
Thank you very much. Amanda, do we have any more speakers?
No.
Thank you very much. In that case, we have a recommend to approve as per officer's recommendation now. Henry, would you wish to take us through that?
Yes, as you quite rightly say, a recommendation to approve in accordance with officer's recommendation. That will cover off adopting a habitats regulations appropriate assessment. On the back of that, then recommending approval, including conditions and the requisite section 106 agreement that was referenced in the earlier committee report. And as Chris talked about, adding back in his introduction. As before, you'll be asked whether you vote in favour, against, or whether you abstain. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wendy, can you take us through?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Arnott.
Against, Chair.
Councillor Bloxham.
For.
Councillor Brown.
In favour.
Councillor Davey.
In favour.
Councillor Gazzard.
In favour.
Councillor Hayward.
Sadly against.
Councillor Hookway.
In favour.
Councillor Howe.
Approve.
Councillor Key.
Approve.
Councillor McCollum.
Approve.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Approve.
Councillor Parr.
For.
Councillor Pratt.
For.
Councillor Ragg.
Reluctantly for.
Councillor Wright.
Happily for.
Thank you. So with just 2 against the approval, I can confirm that the application for land south of Mosthane Link Road is approved.
Thank you very much. And that is the end of our today's agenda and the first virtual meeting of East Devon District Council of any kind. Well, proper public meeting anyway. Can I thank all the participants, all our officers that have made this possible, and all the committee for helping us through this. And get ready for the next one, because I suspect we've got a load more to come up. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Have a lovely day.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Chair.
Thank you, Chair.